a single broken plate, a billionaire's cruelty, and one waitress who refused to stay silent. When Lena Brooks shattered more than just porcelain on the marble floor of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, she had no idea the insult that followed, delivered in flawless Italian by Ethan Vale himself, would change everything. But when she fired back in the same language, the entire room fell silent. The video went viral by morning. She lost her job by noon. And by the next day, the man who destroyed her life was sitting in her apartment with an offer she couldn't refuse. Stay until the end, hit like, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The sound of shattering porcelain cut through the low murmur of conversation like a gunshot. Lena Brooks froze, her hands still extended where the plate had been seconds before. The cream-colored fragment spread across the black marble floor in an almost perfect circle, the remnants of a $60 appetizer creating an abstract art piece that would have been beautiful if it weren't so mortifying. The dining room of Luminare, Manhattan's newest temple to excess, went quiet. Not entirely silent, because the truly wealthy never allowed something as pedestrian as a waitress dropping a plate to interrupt their conversations completely, but quiet enough. Quiet enough that Lena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Quiet enough that every other server in the room stopped mid-stride, relief and pity warring on their faces because it was her and not them. "I'm so sorry," Lena said, her voice steadier than she felt. She was already lowering herself to the floor, already reaching for the larger pieces. "I'll have a replacement out in just— Don't bother." The voice came from directly above her, and Lena's hands stilled. She knew that voice. Everyone in New York knew that voice, even if they'd never heard it in person. It had launched 1,000 business deals, charmed its way through countless boardrooms, and allegedly made grown investors weep. Ethan Vale was looking down at her with an expression that managed to be both bored and contemptuous. He was younger than she'd expected, 32, maybe 33, with dark hair that probably cost more to maintain than her monthly rent, and a suit that definitely did. His eyes were a cold gray that reminded Lena of winter oceans, and they were currently fixed on her with the kind of attention usually reserved for insects. "I said don't bother," he repeated, his tone suggesting this was already more effort than she was worth. Then he turned slightly, addressing the older man seated across from him, some European business associate whose name Lena hadn't caught when she'd taken their order 20 minutes ago. When Ethan spoke again, it was in rapid, fluid Italian. "Esattamente quello che intendevo prima, Giovanni. Gli americani non hanno più orgoglio nel loro lavoro. Guardala, probabilmente ha passato più tempo a farsi selfie nel retro che ad imparare a tenere un piatto. Dovrebbero assumerla in un fast food, non qui." Lena understood every word. "It's exactly what I meant earlier, Giovanni. Americans have no pride in their work anymore. Look at her. She probably spent more time taking selfies in the back than learning to hold a plate. They should hire her at a fast food place, not here." Something hot and sharp twisted in Lena's chest. She'd dealt with rude customers before. She'd dealt with men who looked through her like she was furniture, women who snapped their fingers for service, teenagers who left a $1 tip on a $300 bill. She'd learned to smile through all of it, to nod and apologize and absorb their casual cruelty like it was part of the job description. But this was different. This wasn't just rudeness. This was calculation. Ethan Vale had looked at her, made a complete assessment of her worth as a human being, and decided she deserved to be mocked in a language he assumed she wouldn't understand. He'd chosen cruelty as entertainment, something to bond over with his business partner while she cleaned up at his feet. Lena stood up slowly, the broken porcelain still scattered around her shoes. She looked directly at Ethan Vale, noting with some satisfaction the way his eyes widened slightly at her sudden stillness, and responded in the same fluid Italian he'd used. "Ha ragione, signor Val. Dovrai lavorare in un fast food. Almeno là le persone sanno che comportarsi da stronzi non è un sostituto per avere una personalità." "You're right, Mr. Vale. I should work at a fast food place. At least there, people know that acting like an asshole isn't a substitute for having a personality." For exactly 3 seconds, the entire room went completely silent. Giovanni's eyes went wide, then crinkled with surprised laughter. Ethan's expression transformed from bored contempt to something Lena couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but something else underneath it. Something almost like interest. Then the room exploded into motion. Several diners had their phones out, and Lena realized with a sinking feeling that at least 2 of them had been recording.
Of course they had. Nothing was ever private anymore, especially not when it involved someone like Ethan Vale. Lena, Marcus Chen, the floor manager, materialized at her elbow with the kind of forced calm that meant someone was about to get fired. A word, now.
Lena followed him through the kitchen doors, acutely aware of every eye on her back. The kitchen staff parted like the Red Sea, their expressions ranging from shock to poorly concealed glee. Nobody liked Luminaire. The hours were brutal, the customers worse, and the owner was a petty tyrant who docked pay for invented infractions. But nobody was stupid enough to talk back to a customer, especially not that customer. Marcus led her to the small office off the kitchen, barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs. He didn't sit. Neither did Lena. "What the hell were you thinking?" Marcus's voice was low, controlled. He was 35, had been in the restaurant industry since he was 16, and had the perpetually exhausted look of someone who'd seen everything and was tired of all of it. "Do you have any idea who that is?" "Ethan Vale," Lena said. "Owner of Vale Industries. Net worth somewhere north of $4 billion. Recently divorced, 1 kid, known for hostile takeovers, and being a general." "Don't!" Marcus interrupted. "Don't finish that sentence. Don't make this worse." "Worse than what? He insulted me, in Italian, because he thought I was too stupid to understand." "He's a customer, Lena. A customer worth more than this entire restaurant, more than everyone in it combined. You don't talk back to customers. Even when they're wrong?" "Especially when they're wrong." Marcus rubbed his temples. "I'm sorry, I actually am, but I can't. Romano's already on the phone. You're done." Lena had known it was coming, but the words still hit like a physical blow. "Marcus, there's nothing I can do. You know Romano. He's probably already drafting the story he's going to tell people. How he fired the mouthy waitress who insulted his most important client. He'll dine out on this for months." Marcus pulled an envelope from his desk drawer. 2-week severance. "I know it's not enough, but it's what I could manage." Lena took the envelope with numb fingers. 2-week severance from a place where she'd worked for 3 years, where she'd covered shifts when people called in sick, where she'd smiled through harassment and exhaustion because she needed this job, because she was saving for graduate school, because she'd thought if she just kept her head down and worked hard enough, eventually it would lead somewhere better. "I need to get back out there," Marcus said, not unkindly. "Do you have everything from your locker?" Lena nodded. She'd learned early to keep nothing at work that she couldn't afford to lose, just an extra pair of flats and some aspirin. She walked out through the kitchen, past the line cooks who wouldn't meet her eyes, past the dishwasher who gave her a sympathetic nod, past all of it. She collected her coat and bag from the tiny locker room, changed out of her uniform in a bathroom stall, and emerged onto the Manhattan street in jeans and a sweater that definitely weren't warm enough for March. The cold air bit through the cotton immediately. Lena pulled her coat tighter and started walking, no real destination in mind, just away. Away from Luminaire, away from the scene of her spectacular public self-destruction, away from the life she'd been carefully building for the past 3 years. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, then buzzed again, and again. Lena pulled it out and felt her stomach drop. 17 notifications, all from people she barely knew. 3 missed calls from her roommate Jessica. And when she opened her social media, which she barely used, just an account she'd made years ago and never deleted, she saw it. The video was everywhere. Someone had posted it to Twitter, someone else to TikTok, another to Instagram. She watched herself stand up in jerky phone footage, watched her own face go cold and determined, watched her mouth move with words subtitled in English below. "You're right, Mr. Vale. I should work at a fast food place. At least there, people know that acting like an asshole isn't a substitute for having a personality." The comments were a war zone. "OMG, Queen, get him. She's going to be so fired, lol. Ethan Vale is a known AH. This is amazing. This is staged. Nobody talks to customers like that. Who is she? Someone find her. How did she learn Italian? I want the full story. RIP her job." Lena kept walking, her fingers numb around the phone. The video had been posted 40 minutes ago and already had 200,000 views. As she watched, the number ticked up. 210,000. 220,000. She was a meme. A moment. A brief spark of entertainment for people who would forget her by tomorrow while she was still dealing with the fallout. Her phone rang. Jessica. "Lena, oh my God, are you okay? I saw the video. Everyone saw the video. It's everywhere. I'm fine, Lena lied. I'm heading home. Romano fired you, didn't he? Yeah, bastard. Jessica had never liked Luminaire. She worked in marketing, made decent money, and had been telling Lena for months to quit and find something better. You should sue. That's wrongful termination. You were defending yourself from verbal harassment. Jess. Lena stopped at a crosswalk, watching the walk signal blink down from 15. I can't afford a lawyer. I can't afford anything right now. I need to figure this out. Okay, we'll figure it out. Just come home. I'll order Thai food and we'll make a plan. Lena ended the call as she crossed the street. She should feel more upset, she thought distantly. She'd just lost her job, been publicly humiliated, and become an unwilling internet celebrity. She should be crying or panicking or something. Instead, she just felt tired, and maybe, buried under the exhaustion and shock, a tiny spark of satisfaction. Because Ethan Vale's expression when she'd answered him in Italian had been worth it. Just for a second, she'd seen him realize that he'd miscalculated, that the person he'd dismissed as too stupid to understand had understood perfectly. It wouldn't pay her rent, it wouldn't get her job back, but it was something. Lena's apartment was a fifth-floor walk-up in Queens that she shared with Jessica and a rotating cast of mice that the landlord swore didn't exist. It was cramped, loud, and smelled perpetually of the Indian restaurant 2 floors down, but it was cheap enough that they could afford it while still having money for things like food and student loan payments. Jessica was waiting on the couch when Lena walked in, laptop open, Thai food containers already spread across the coffee table. She looked up, took one look at Lena's face, and closed the laptop. Okay, so the good news is you're internet famous. That's the good news? The bad news is you're internet famous for basically calling a billionaire an asshole in Italian on video. Jessica pushed a container of pad thai toward Lena. Eat. You look like you're going to pass out. Lena sat, picked up the chopsticks, and stared at the noodles without seeing them. How bad is it? Define bad. The video has over 3 million views across platforms. There are already reaction videos. Someone made a remix of you saying acting like an asshole isn't a substitute for having a personality set to a trap beat. It slaps, honestly. Jess. Right, sorry. The point is you're trending. Number 3 on Twitter, Waitress owns Billionaire is the narrative most people are going with. You're basically a folk hero to everyone who's ever worked in service. Great. That and $3 will get me a cup of coffee. Jessica reached over and squeezed Lena's hand. I know this sucks. I know you needed that job. But maybe this is actually an opportunity? You've got attention now. You could leverage it into something. Start a TikTok about restaurant industry horror stories. Write a viral Twitter thread about entitled rich people. I could help you monetize. I don't want to monetize my public humiliation. It wasn't humiliation. You stood up for yourself. That's not nothing. Lena finally took a bite of pad thai. It was cold. She ate it anyway. I have 2 months of rent saved, maybe 3 if I'm really careful. I need a new job, not internet fame. Okay, we'll make a list. You've got experience, good references from your old job at Carlo's. No restaurant is going to hire me now. I'm the waitress who went viral for insulting a customer. No matter what he said first, that's what they'll see. Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it, because they both knew Lena was right. The service industry was small and everyone talked. By tomorrow, every hiring manager in Manhattan would know her face. Lena's phone buzzed again. Another notification. She'd turned off most of them, but some were still getting through. This one was an Instagram DM from someone named @EthanValeUpdates. Apparently there were fan accounts for billionaires now, asking if she wanted to share her side of the story. She blocked the account and put her phone face down. I'm going to bed, she said, even though it was only 8 p.m. Thanks for the food. Jessica didn't argue, just squeezed her hand again. It's going to be okay. Lena wanted to believe her. She went to her room, closed the door, and lay down on her bed, still fully dressed. Through the thin walls, she could hear the couple next door arguing in Russian, the bass line from the apartment below, a siren wailing past on the street. She'd come to New York 6 years ago with a degree in Renaissance studies that everyone told her was useless, $2,000 in savings, and a plan. The plan had been simple. Work, save money, get experience, apply to graduate programs, become the kind of scholar who spent their days researching in Italian archives and teaching seminars on Medici patronage. The plan had not included working 3 different waitressing jobs in 4 years, watching her savings account hover perpetually around $3,000, and becoming internet famous for telling off a billionaire who probably wouldn't remember her name by tomorrow. Lena closed her eyes and tried not to calculate how long it would take to save up another $3,000 if she couldn't find work. Tried not to think about her student loans due every month without fail. Tried not to wonder if this was it, if this was the moment everything she'd worked for finally collapsed. She must have fallen asleep eventually because she woke to bright sunlight streaming through her window and someone knocking on her door. "Lena?" Jessica's voice was strange. "You need to see this." Lena stumbled out of bed, still in yesterday's clothes, and opened the door. Jessica was holding her phone out with an expression Lena couldn't read. "What?" "You got a message from him." Lena took the phone. The Instagram DM was from a verified account, at Ethan Vale. The profile picture showed him at some charity gala, looking expensive and untouchable. The message was short. "Miss Brooks, I'd like to speak with you about a potential opportunity. Please contact my assistant at the number below at your earliest convenience. EV." Lena read it 3 times. "This is fake. It has to be fake. It's verified. Blue check and everything. I already looked up the phone number. It goes to the general line for Vale Industries." "Why would Ethan Vale want to talk to me?" Jessica's expression was complicated. "I don't know, but I think you should find out." The offices of Vale Industries occupied floors 40 through 50 of a building in Midtown that probably cost more than Lena's entire neighborhood. The lobby was all glass and steel and carefully curated art pieces that were probably worth more than she'd make in her lifetime. The security guard who checked her ID looked her up and down with obvious skepticism before making a call. "You can go up," he said finally, handing back her driver's license like it might be contagious. 47th floor. Someone will meet you." The elevator was nicer than Lena's apartment. It had mirrors and soft lighting and played classical music that she recognized, Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, Spring Movement. She watched her reflection rise through the floors and tried to calm her racing heart. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. 12 hours ago, she'd been fired for insulting this man, and now she was in his building about to... What? Apologize? Get sued? She had no idea. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought the word minimalist meant aggressively expensive. A woman in her 50s with perfect posture and a Chanel suit was waiting. "Miss Brooks, I'm Catherine Mills, Mr. Vale's executive assistant. Please follow me." Lena followed Catherine through a hallway lined with photographs. Ethan Vale shaking hands with presidents and CEOs, cutting ribbons, giving speeches. In all of them, he had the same slightly distant smile, like he was thinking about something more important than the moment he was in. Catherine stopped at a set of double doors. "Mr. Vale is finishing a call. He'll be with you in a moment. Please have a seat." The office beyond was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, the morning sun turning the city into something beautiful and false. The furniture was modern and uncomfortable looking, all sharp angles and leather. And sitting behind a desk the size of Lena's bed was Ethan Vale. He was on the phone, speaking rapid-fire Mandarin. Lena caught maybe 1 word in 5. Her Mandarin was functional at best, mostly learned from a college roommate and late-night takeout orders. She sat in one of the uncomfortable chairs and tried to look like she belonged here. Ethan ended the call and looked at her. In the daylight, without the dramatic lighting of Luminare's dining room, he looked tired. There were circles under his eyes and a coffee stain on one cuff that somehow made him seem more human. "Miss Brooks, thank you for coming. I wasn't aware I had a choice." The words came out sharper than Lena intended, but she didn't take them back. Ethan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You don't, but I appreciate you pretending otherwise." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." Lena sat, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to run. "I assume you saw the video," Ethan said. "Hard to miss when it's been shared 3 million times. 3.7 million, actually. It's still going." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those cold gray eyes. You speak Italian? Yes. Where did you learn? University, double major in Italian and art history. Lena met his gaze evenly. I also read Dante in the original, know more about Renaissance altarpiece composition than anyone should, and can identify most major Venetian painters by brushwork alone. I'm full of surprises.
Clearly. Ethan was quiet for a moment.
I owe you an apology.
Lena blinked. That was the last thing she'd expected. Excuse me? What I said yesterday was inappropriate. Cruel, actually. I made assumptions about you based on nothing, and then compounded the insult by doing it in a language I thought you wouldn't understand. He spoke carefully, like someone who'd practiced this speech. I'm sorry. Lena didn't know what to say. She'd come here expecting anger or threats, or maybe a job offer to make the bad press go away, but not this. Not a billionaire apologizing to her in his corner office with what seemed like actual sincerity. Okay, she said finally. Apology accepted. Can I go now? I also have a job offer. There it was. I'm not signing an NDA. I'm not asking you to. Ethan stood and walked to the windows, hands in his pockets. Against the Manhattan skyline, he looked like something out of a magazine spread. I'm acquiring a property in Florence, a small chain of historic hotels that have been in the same family for 200 years. The current owner, Signora Castellani, is reluctant to sell to an American. Can't imagine why. Ethan ignored the sarcasm. The deal is worth $60 million. I've been working on it for 6 months. Yesterday, after our encounter, I had a 2-hour call with Signora Castellani where she told me, in Italian, that she would never sell her family's legacy to someone who treats service workers with contempt. He turned to face Lena. She saw the video. So did most of Italy, apparently. So you want me to what? Make a video apologizing? Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding? No. I want you to come to Florence with me for 6 weeks as a consultant. Help me understand the cultural context I'm missing. Translate, yes, but also help me not make an ass of myself. His expression was hard to read. Signora Castellani suggested that if I valued Italian culture and language enough to employ someone who speaks it fluently, perhaps I valued more than just the bottom line. Lena stared at him. This is the worst job offer I've ever heard. The pay is $15,000 a week, plus expenses, accommodations, and airfare. Lena did the math. $90,000 for 6 weeks of work. That was more than she'd made in the last 3 years combined. That was graduate school paid for. That was every student loan cleared. That was a future. There has to be a catch. The catch is you'd be working for me, and I'm difficult. Ethan crossed his arms. I work long hours. I expect excellence. I don't tolerate excuses or lateness or anything less than complete professionalism. And yet you want to hire the woman who called you an asshole on viral video. I want to hire the woman who speaks 3 languages, has a degree in exactly the period I'm trying to understand, and isn't afraid to stand up for herself. He returned to his desk, pulled out a folder, and slid it across to her. Contract. Read it, have a lawyer look at it if you want. I need an answer by tomorrow. Lena opened the folder. The contract was surprisingly straightforward. 6 weeks, $15,000 a week, payment in full at the end of the term. Accommodations and travel covered separately. No NDA, no non-compete, no weird clauses about personal conduct. Why me? She asked. You could hire an actual consultant, someone with credentials and experience. I've hired plenty of consultants. They tell me what they think I want to hear. Ethan met her eyes. You told me the truth. That's worth more than credentials. Lena closed the folder. I need to think about it. Of course. Catherine will see you out. Ethan was already turning back to his computer, dismissing her. Then he paused. Miss Brooks, for what it's worth, you were right about the personality thing. Lena left the office with the contract burning a hole in her bag. Catherine walked her back to the elevator in silence, pressed the button, and handed her a business card. Mr. Vale's private number, she said quietly. Call when you decide. He's not as terrible as he seems. The elevator doors closed before Lena could respond. Jessica was waiting at the apartment with pizza and wine when Lena got home. So? What did he want? Lena dropped the contract on the coffee table. Jessica read it, then read it again, then looked up with wide eyes.
This is real? This is actually real money? Apparently. Lena, this is insane. You have to take this. Do I? Lena sat down, suddenly exhausted. He wants me to go to Florence for 6 weeks to help him buy hotels, to basically be his cultural translator so he can convince an Italian grandmother that he's not exactly what he showed himself to be yesterday. For $90,000. It's not about the money. It's definitely about the money. Lena, you were fired yesterday. You have 2 months of rent saved. You've been trying to save for graduate school for 6 years. Jessica grabbed her hands. This is it. This is the chance. What if it's a disaster? What if I get there and he's actually terrible? What if... Then you leave. You take the money you've already made and you leave. Jessica's expression was fierce. But what if it's not? What if this is the universe giving you exactly what you need after years of bullshit waitressing jobs and pretending not to notice when customers grab your ass? Lena pulled her hands away and picked up the contract again. 6 weeks. $90,000. Florence, which she'd studied for years and never seen in person. And Ethan Vale, who was either sincere about changing or very good at manipulation. I'll sleep on it, she said. She didn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city outside her window. She thought about her student loans, about her empty savings account, about the graduate school application she'd been too scared to submit because she couldn't afford to move if she got accepted. She thought about her mother, who died when Lena was 17, and who'd always told her to take chances, to be brave, to not let fear make her decisions. She thought about standing in Luminary's dining room with broken porcelain at her feet, choosing truth over safety. At 3 a.m, Lena got up, found the business card Catherine had given her, and sent a text to Ethan Vale's private number. I accept. When do we leave? The response came 30 seconds later. Monday. Catherine will send details. Don't be late. EV. Lena put the phone down and realized her hands were shaking. She'd just agreed to spend 6 weeks working for a man she'd met twice, both times under terrible circumstances, in a foreign country, for money that seemed too good to be true. She was either very brave or very stupid. Jessica appeared in her doorway, hair mussed from sleep. Did you just do what I think you did? Yeah. Okay. Jessica came in and sat on the bed. So, we're going to Italy. I'm going to Italy. Right, you're going. I'm living vicariously. Jessica pulled out her phone. Okay, we have 4 days. We need to get you clothes that don't scream, broke waitress. No offense. A good suitcase, and probably some kind of crash course in dealing with billionaires. Jess, I can't afford... You're about to make $90,000. You can afford a few nice outfits and a suitcase that doesn't have duct tape holding it together. Jessica was already scrolling through her phone. Also, we should Google him. Like, really Google him. If you're going to be stuck with him for 6 weeks, you should at least know what you're dealing with. They spent the rest of the night on the couch, laptop open between them, diving into the strange and carefully curated world of Ethan Vale. There were the standard corporate profiles. Harvard Business School. Youngest person to make the Forbes Billionaire list at 28, known for aggressive but successful acquisitions. Then there were the personal details, harder to find, but there if you looked. Divorced 2 years ago from a fashion designer named Claire Ashford. Custody of their daughter Mia. Notoriously private about his personal life. And then there were the darker whispers. Business rivals who'd been crushed. Partnerships that had ended badly. A reputation for being brilliant but cold. Effective but ruthless. He's not going to be your friend, Jessica said around 4 a.m., both of them slightly drunk on wine and exhaustion. You know that, right? This is business. Don't forget that. I won't, Lena promised. She wouldn't let herself forget. Ethan Vale was offering her money, not friendship, a job, not a relationship. She was a problem to be solved, a tool to be used. That was fine. She could be professional. She could keep her distance. 6 weeks, $90,000, and then she'd never have to see him again. It seemed simple enough. The flight to Florence left JFK at 6 p.m. on Monday, which meant Lena spent the entire day in a state of controlled panic, masked as productivity. Jessica had helped her pack the night before, cramming the new suitcase with clothes they'd bought over the weekend. Simple dresses, professional slacks, blouses that didn't scream, I normally wear a polyester uniform. Everything was black or navy or gray, safe choices that Jessica had insisted were European chic, but that Lena suspected just looked like she was attending a series of funerals. Catherine had sent detailed instructions via email. Arrive at the private terminal 2 hours early, bring passport and documentation, dress code business casual. The private terminal part had thrown Lena. She'd assumed they'd be flying commercial, maybe business class, if Ethan Vale was feeling generous. The idea of a private jet felt like something from a different universe. The terminal, when she arrived via an Uber that cost more than she wanted to think about, looked nothing like the chaotic sprawl of JFK's main terminals. It was small, quiet, decorated like an upscale hotel lobby. A woman in a crisp uniform checked her passport, offered her champagne that Lena declined because her stomach was already doing acrobatics, and directed her to a leather sofa to wait. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later with Catherine and another man Lena didn't recognize. He was on his phone, speaking rapid German, and barely glanced at Lena as he passed. Catherine at least offered a small smile. "Miss Brooks? Good, you're punctual. This is David Harmon, Mr. Vale's head of acquisitions. He'll be joining us for the first 2 weeks in Florence." David was in his 40s, balding, with the kind of expensive watch that suggested he was very good at his job. He shook Lena's hand with a grip that bordered on aggressive. "So you're the viral waitress. So you're the guy who helps billionaires buy things they don't need." David's eyebrows went up. Catherine made a small noise that might have been a suppressed laugh. Ethan, still on his phone, turned to look at Lena with something that might have been amusement. "I like her," David said after a moment. "She's got spine." They boarded 15 minutes later. The jet was exactly as obscene as Lena had imagined. Cream leather seats that reclined into beds, a conference table, a full galley with a flight attendant who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Lena took a seat near a window and tried not to gawk. Ethan ended his call and sat across from her, pulling out a laptop. "We'll go over the Castellani file during the flight. David will brief you on what we know so far, and I'll need you to review their family history. The hotels themselves date back to the 1820s, originally a single property in Florence, then expanded to Venice and Rome in the early 20th century." "Good evening to you too," Lena said. Ethan paused, fingers hovering over his keyboard. "What?" "It's called a greeting. Normal people use them when they haven't seen each other in 4 days." David, settling into a seat across the aisle, coughed into his hand. Catherine, organizing files at the conference table, was definitely smiling now. Ethan closed his laptop with deliberate care. "Good evening, Miss Brooks. I trust your flight preparations went well and you're adequately rested for the work ahead." "See, was that so hard?" "Considerably." But there was something in his expression that wasn't quite annoyance. "Are you always this difficult with employers?" "Only the ones who need it." Lena pulled out her own laptop, a 5-year-old model that wheezed when it booted up but still worked. "So, the Castellani hotels, what exactly am I walking into?" The flight attendant brought drinks, whiskey for Ethan and David, water for Catherine, and a glass of wine that Lena accepted mostly because her hands needed something to hold. David pulled up a presentation on the large monitor at the front of the cabin, and for the next hour, Lena got an education in high-stakes real estate acquisition. The Castellani family owned 3 properties: the original Hotel Castellani in Florence, a boutique hotel in Venice near the Rialto, and a smaller property in Rome. Combined, they were worth about $60 million, but their real value was in the history and prestige. Italian nobility had stayed there, famous artists, even a few popes. The current owner, Signora Elena Castellani, was 78 and had no children. Her nephew wanted to sell. She did not. "We've been negotiating for 6 months," David explained, clicking through photos of ornate lobbies and Renaissance frescoes. "The nephew, Marco, is reasonable. He understands the family can't maintain the properties forever, that they need capital injection for renovations. But Signora Castellani refuses to meet with us. Says she won't sell her family's legacy to Americans who see Italy as a business opportunity." "Can't imagine where she got that idea," Lena murmured. Ethan shot her a look. "Your job is to help me prove her wrong. I don't want to turn these hotels into generic luxury properties. I want to preserve them, restore them properly. But I need her to believe that." "Do you believe it?" Lena asked. "Or is that just good marketing?" The cabin went very quiet. Catherine stopped organizing files. David's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Even the flight attendant, polishing wine glasses in the galley, seemed to freeze. Ethan leaned back in his seat, studying Lena with those cold gray eyes. Are you trying to get fired before we even land? I'm trying to understand what I'm supposed to be selling. Because if you want me to lie to a 78-year-old woman about your intentions, you should probably find someone else. I don't lie in business, Miss Brooks. It's inefficient. Ethan's voice was controlled, but there was steel underneath. I mean what I said. These properties have historic and cultural value. Turning them into another generic chain would destroy that value, which would be bad business. So yes, I want to preserve them, because it's the right thing to do, and because it will make them worth more in the long term. Is that a good enough answer? Lena held his gaze. It's honest. That's a start. David cleared his throat. Right. Well, moving on. Lena, we'll need you to research the family history in detail. Signora Castellani is very proud of her ancestry. There's apparently some connection to the Medici court, though we haven't confirmed that. If you can find documentation, it might help build rapport. Lena perked up at that. The Medici court? Which branch? Do you have dates? For the next 2 hours, Lena forgot to be nervous. She pulled out her notebook, the same battered moleskin she'd used in college, and started making notes as David walked through what they knew about the family. The Castellanis had been merchants originally, then moved into hospitality in the early 1800s when Florence started attracting European aristocracy on the Grand Tour. The original hotel had hosted everyone from British lords to American writers. Mark Twain had supposedly stayed there. Henry James had mentioned it in a letter. This is incredible, Lena said, scrolling through digitized records that David pulled up. If the Medici connection is real, there might be records in the state archives, letters, account books, maybe even portraits. Can you find out? Ethan asked. I can try. I'll need access to the Archivio di Stato, but they're usually good about research requests if you have academic credentials. You have those? I have a degree and enough published student papers that I'm in their database. It might work. Lena was already making a mental list of what she'd need. Letter of introduction, research proposal, probably some strategic name-dropping of her old professors. When do we meet with Signora Castellani? We don't, Ethan said. Not yet. She's refused 3 times. We're hoping that after a few weeks in Florence, after we've done our homework and shown good faith, Marco can convince her to at least have coffee. So I'm supposed to research a family for weeks without meeting them? What if I find something she doesn't want found? Then we use our discretion. Ethan closed his laptop. This isn't an academic exercise, Miss Brooks. The goal is to facilitate the acquisition, not write a dissertation. Lena bristled at that. I'm not going to fabricate evidence or hide inconvenient facts. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be strategic about what information serves the negotiation and what doesn't. Ethan stood, stretching. We land in 6 hours. I suggest you get some rest. Tomorrow, we hit the ground running. He disappeared into what Lena assumed was a bedroom in the back of the jet. David followed, still tapping on his phone. Catherine gathered her files and gave Lena an sympathetic look. He's always like this before a major deal, short-tempered, demanding. Try not to take it personally. Does he ever take anything personally? Lena asked. Catherine's smile was enigmatic. Not if he can help it. Sleep well, Miss Brooks. Lena converted her seat into a bed, which felt obscene and wonderful at the same time, and tried to sleep. The jet engines hummed beneath her, steady and expensive. Through the window, she could see nothing but darkness and stars. She kept thinking about Ethan's face when she'd challenged him. That flash of something that might have been respect or might have been irritation. She couldn't tell which, and that bothered her more than it should. This was a job. 6 weeks, $90,000, nothing personal. She needed to remember that. But as she drifted off somewhere over the Atlantic, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something a lot more complicated than translating Italian and researching old families. They landed in Florence at 10 a.m. local time, and Lena's first thought as they descended was that photographs didn't do it justice. The city spread below them in terracotta and gold, the Duomo rising like something out of a dream, the Arno River cutting through it all like a silver ribbon. Her second thought was that she was going to pass out from exhaustion. We're going directly to the hotel, Catherine said, as they cleared customs. A process that took about 5 minutes, presumably because private jet passengers didn't wait in lines like normal humans. You'll have time to shower and change before the first meeting. Meeting? Lena's brain felt like cotton. I thought we weren't meeting the Castellanis yet. We're not. We're meeting with Marco, the nephew, and the family's lawyer. Just introductions and laying groundwork. They drove through Florence in 2 black cars, Lena riding with Catherine, while Ethan and David were in the first vehicle. The city rushed past the windows. Narrow streets, buildings that looked like they'd been standing for centuries, tourists clustered around gelato shops and leather markets. Lena wanted to stop, to walk, to actually see it, but the cars didn't slow until they pulled up to a hotel that made her breath catch. Hotel Castellani sat on a quiet street near the Ponte Vecchio, its facade a perfect example of Renaissance architecture. 3 stories of honey-colored stone, arched windows with wrought iron balconies, a heavy wooden door that probably dated back 200 years. Above the door, carved into the stone, was the family crest, a tower flanked by olive branches. "It's beautiful," Lena said, and meant it. "It's falling apart," David said from behind her. He'd gotten out of the first car and was looking at the building with the critical eye of someone who saw property, not history. "The plumbing is original, half the rooms don't have air conditioning, and the roof needs replacing. But yes, it's beautiful." They checked in at a front desk that belonged in a museum. Dark wood, marble top, everything slightly worn in a way that suggested generations of use. The clerk, a young man with excellent English and a wary expression, gave them keys and directed them to their rooms on the 2nd floor. Lena's room was small but perfect. Frescoed ceiling, antique furniture, windows that overlooked a courtyard garden where lemon trees grew in terracotta pots. The bathroom was, as David had warned, clearly an afterthought, squeezed into what had probably been a closet, with a shower so small she'd have to be strategic about turning around. But the water was hot, and after 10 minutes under the spray, Lena felt almost human. She changed into one of the dresses Jessica had insisted she buy, simple navy with a professional neckline, and was attempting to make her hair look less like a bird's nest when someone knocked. Catherine, looking impossibly fresh considering she'd been traveling just as long. "Ready? They're waiting downstairs?" The meeting took place in what had probably been the hotel's original dining room. High ceilings, more frescoes, a long table that could seat 20. Currently it seated 5. Ethan at the head, David on his right, and 3 Italians who turned as Lena entered. Ah, finally. The man who stood was about 50, well-dressed, with the kind of tan that suggested he spent a lot of time somewhere sunny. "You must be Miss Brooks, Marco Castellani." His English was perfect, his handshake warm. The woman next to him, elegant, mid-40s, with silver reading glasses on a chain, introduced herself as Vittoria Rossi, the family's lawyer. The third person, a younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, was apparently Marco's assistant. "Please sit," Marco said, gesturing to the chair next to Ethan. "We're so pleased you could join us." Lena sat, acutely aware of Ethan beside her. He'd changed into a fresh suit, looked annoyingly alert, and was currently studying Marco with the kind of focus she imagined he brought to all his business dealings. "Miss Brooks will be assisting with cultural consultation," Ethan said. "Her expertise in Italian Renaissance history should prove valuable as we discuss the properties." "Fascinating," Vittoria said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "And tell me, Miss Brooks, what exactly does a cultural consultant do?" It was a test. Lena recognized it immediately, the slight edge in Vittoria's voice, the way Marco was watching her with polite interest that didn't quite reach his eyes. They were trying to figure out if she was real or just window dressing. "I make sure Mr. Vale doesn't accidentally insult your entire country," Lena said in Italian. "Among other things." The room went still for half a second, then Marco laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine. Even Vittoria's expression softened slightly. "Well," Marco said, switching to Italian himself, "that's refreshingly honest. Does he insult people often?" "Only when he thinks they don't understand him." Ethan, who had been following the exchange without expression, said in flawless Italian, "I'm sitting right here." "Yes, Mr. Vale, we're aware," Vittoria said, also in Italian, though she was almost smiling now. "Your Italian is quite good, by the way. Where did you learn?" "University, and then 3 years working in Milan early in my career." Ethan switched back to English, probably for David's benefit. But Miss Brooks is correct. I have a tendency to assume I'm the smartest person in the room. It's a bad habit. At least you admit it, Marco said. My aunt would appreciate that. She values honesty above almost everything else. How is Signora Castellani? Lena asked. I understand she's been unwell. Marco's expression shifted, warmth replacing the business polish. She's well enough, stubborn, refuses to slow down even though the doctor tells her to rest. She's at the Venice property right now, actually, insists on personally overseeing the summer preparations. She runs the hotels herself? She runs everything herself, has for 40 years since my uncle died. She knows every employee by name, every room, every story. Marco's voice held affection and exasperation in equal measure. Which is why this sale is so difficult. She doesn't see these hotels as property. She sees them as family. Vittoria cut in, her tone professional again. Which brings us to the purpose of today's meeting. Mr. Vale, my client wants assurances, in writing, about your intentions for the properties, specifically that you won't change the names, that current employees will be retained, and that the historic integrity will be preserved. David pulled out a folder. We've drafted a preliminary agreement addressing those concerns. For the next hour, Lena watched Ethan work. He was good, she had to admit. Patient when Marco pushed back on terms. Firm when Vittoria tried to insert clauses that would limit his operational control. Strategic about what he'd concede and what he wouldn't. David handled the financial details, pulling up spreadsheets and projections, but it was Ethan who drove the negotiation. What surprised Lena was that he actually listened. When Marco talked about his aunt's fears that the hotels would lose their character, Ethan didn't dismiss them. He asked questions, wanted to understand, even offered to have his architects present their restoration plans before any work began. Your aunt is welcome to review everything, Ethan said. In fact, I'd prefer it. She knows these buildings better than anyone. It would be stupid not to use that knowledge. She'll never agree to meet with you, Marco said bluntly. I'm sorry to be so direct, but you should know. She saw that video, the one with Miss Brooks. The room went quiet. Lena felt heat crawl up her neck. She saw it and said that any man who speaks to service workers that way doesn't deserve her family's legacy. Marco looked genuinely apologetic. I told her you apologized, that you hired Miss Brooks specifically because of what happened, but my aunt holds grudges. Then we'll have to change her mind, Ethan said calmly. Miss Brooks, how long would you need to research the family's Medici connections? Lena pulled her thoughts together. The Archivio di Stato should have records if they exist. Maybe 2 weeks if I can get access quickly. Make it 1 week. Ethan stood, signaling the meeting was over. Marco, if you can arrange for your aunt to be in Florence next week, I'd like Miss Brooks to present her findings directly. No me, no lawyers, just her and Signora Castellani. Woman to woman, historian to historian. Marco exchanged a glance with Vittoria. I can try, but I'm not promising anything. That's all I'm asking. They shook hands, made polite noises about dinner sometime, and the Italians left. David immediately started packing up files, already on his phone, arranging the next thing. Catherine was making notes, and Ethan turned to Lena with an expression she couldn't quite read. 1 week, he said. Can you actually do it? Probably. If the records are where I think they are, and if the archivists cooperate, and if I don't sleep much. You'll have whatever resources you need. Catherine will arrange archive access and anything else. Ethan checked his watch. It's 2 p.m. Take the afternoon to get oriented. We'll meet for dinner at 8 to discuss strategy. He walked out before Lena could respond. David followed, still on his phone. Catherine gathered her things and paused at the door. There's a research library 2 blocks from here. I took the liberty of setting up an appointment for you tomorrow morning with the head archivist. He's expecting you at 9. She handed Lena a business card. Dr. Tommaso Ricci. He's brilliant and slightly insufferable. You'll like him. Then Lena was alone in the frescoed dining room of a Renaissance hotel in Florence, with 1 week to prove herself and no idea if she could actually pull this off. She pulled out her phone to text Jessica, then remembered the time difference. It was barely 8 a.m. in New York. Instead, she opened her notes app and started making a list of what she'd need. Archive access, secondary sources on the Medici court, any published histories of the Castellani family, maps of Florence from the 1500s. Her hands were shaking slightly. From exhaustion or adrenaline or the sudden realization that she was actually here in Florence, about to dive into the kind of research she'd only dreamed about in graduate school. Lena walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard garden. The lemon trees swayed in the afternoon breeze. Somewhere above, she could hear voices, hotel staff probably, going about their work in a building their families had worked in for generations. She thought about Signor Castellani refusing to sell to a man who'd insulted a waitress on viral video. About Marco's obvious affection for his stubborn aunt. About Ethan's careful negotiation and his admission that he assumed he was always the smartest person in the room. About herself, standing in a Manhattan restaurant with broken porcelain at her feet, choosing honesty over safety. 1 week, she said aloud to the empty room. No problem. It was absolutely a problem, but Lena had never been good at backing down from challenges, even the impossible ones. Dinner at 8 turned out to mean dinner at 8:30 because Ethan got pulled into an emergency call about some property in Singapore. Lena spent the extra 30 minutes in the hotel's small library, a room lined with books that were probably worth more than her education, trying to prepare questions for the archivist tomorrow. When she finally made it to the restaurant Ethan had chosen, he was already there with David, both of them looking at a laptop and arguing about something in low voices. The restaurant was small, family-owned, tucked into a side street that tourists probably never found. The owner greeted Ethan by name, which suggested he'd been here before. Miss Brooks? Ethan closed the laptop as she approached. We ordered wine. I hope that's acceptable. It's Italy. Wine is basically water here. Lena sat, accepting a glass of red that was probably more expensive than her entire wardrobe. So, strategy. David launched into a detailed breakdown of the timeline. 1 week for research, then a meeting with Signora Castellani if Marco could arrange it, then 2 weeks of detailed negotiations if she agreed to sell, then final contracts and closing. 4 weeks total, maybe 5 if complications arose. And if she doesn't agree to sell? Lena asked. Then we've wasted 6 months and $60 million in potential acquisition, David said flatly. Which would be bad for everyone. No pressure then. Ethan hadn't touched his wine. He was watching Lena with that unsettling focus again. Tell me about the Medici connection. What are we looking for? Lena set down her glass and switched into the mode she'd used in college seminars. Organized, confident, the version of herself that could talk about dead people and old documents like they mattered. Because they did. The Medici family controlled Florence from the 15th to 18th centuries, with some interruptions. They were bankers originally, then became de facto rulers. If the Castellanis have a genuine connection, it probably dates to the 15th or 16th century, when the Medici were at their peak. She pulled out her notebook, flipped to a page of scribbled notes. The connection could be economic. The Castellanis might have been merchants who did business with the Medici Bank. Or it could be social, marriage connections, court appointments, patronage. What's the best case scenario? Ethan asked. Best case? We find documentation that one of the Castellanis held an official position in the Medici court. Maybe an administrator or a court artist, or even just a merchant with exclusive contracts. Something that proves they were part of the inner circle, not just random Florentines who happened to exist at the same time. And that would matter to Signora Castellani because it would prove her family was important, not just successful, but historically significant, part of the cultural heritage she's trying to protect. Lena met his eyes. You're not just buying hotels, Mr. Vale. You're asking her to trust you with 400 years of family pride. If I can show her that pride is justified, that there's documentation proving her ancestors were as important as she believes, it might make her more willing to let go. David looked skeptical. That's a lot of psychology based on old documents. That's literally what history is. Old documents and psychology. Ethan almost smiled at that. What do you need from us? Nothing. Just stay out of my way and let me work. Lena took a sip of wine, then added, and maybe don't insult any more waitresses while I'm trying to rehabilitate your image. I'll do my best. Food arrived, pasta that was somehow better than anything Lena had ever eaten, even though it was just butter and cheese and noodles. They talked business through dinner, David outlining contingency plans, and Ethan asking sharp questions about timeline and resources. Lena mostly listened, letting the rhythm of their conversation wash over her while she ate, and tried not to think about how surreal this all was. 2 weeks ago, she'd been carrying plates in a Manhattan restaurant. Now she was eating handmade pasta in Florence with a billionaire and his acquisitions team, about to dive into Renaissance archives like she was actually the scholar she'd always wanted to be. "You're quiet," Ethan said, startling her out of her thoughts. David had stepped away to take a call, leaving them alone at the table. "Just tired. It's been a long day." "You're having second thoughts."
"I'm having fifth and sixth thoughts." Lena set down her fork. "This is insane. You know that, right? I'm a waitress with a useless degree. I haven't done serious research in 6 years. What if I can't find anything? What if I make this worse?"
Ethan was quiet for a moment, turning his wine glass in slow circles. "When I was 23, I bought my first company. Small tech startup, nothing dramatic. I spent 3 months convinced I'd made a terrible mistake, that I was going to lose everything and prove my father right about me being reckless and impulsive. What happened? I learned that confidence isn't the same as competence. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew how to find people who did, and I knew how to work harder than anyone else." He looked at her directly. "You have the competence, Miss Brooks. The degree isn't useless if you know how to use it. The research skills don't disappear just because you haven't practiced them. All you need is the confidence to trust yourself." "Is this supposed to be a motivational speech? Because it needs work." "It's supposed to be the truth." Ethan stood, pulling out his wallet. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow you start proving me right about hiring you." He left before Lena could respond, which was probably for the best because she didn't know what to say. She sat alone at the table, finishing her wine, thinking about confidence and competence, and the gap between who she was and who she wanted to be. Eventually, she paid her share of the bill, using the corporate card Catherine had given her, which felt like playing dress-up, and walked back to the hotel through streets that were quiet except for the occasional cluster of late-night diners and lovers walking hand in hand. Florence at night was impossibly beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made her chest ache with something she couldn't quite name. Want, maybe, or recognition. This was the world she'd studied in books and lectures, made real and solid and right in front of her. She could do this. She could find the Castellani connection, could prove herself to Ethan and Marco, and most importantly to Signor Castellani. Could maybe, possibly, turn this ridiculous job into something that mattered. Or she could fail spectacularly and prove everyone who'd ever told her that Renaissance studies was a waste of time absolutely correct. Lena made it to her room, fell into the antique bed without bothering to change, and slept dreamlessly until her alarm went off at 7 a.m. The Archivio di Stato di Firenze was housed in a building that had been a convent once, all stone walls and vaulted ceilings, and the kind of quiet that felt sacred. Lena arrived at 8:45, nervous and over-caffeinated, to find Dr. Tommaso Ricci waiting in the entrance hall. He was exactly what Catherine had promised. Brilliant and insufferable in equal measure. Mid-60s, impeccably dressed, with the air of someone who knew he was the smartest person in any given room and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. "Miss Brooks." He looked her up and down with the critical eye of someone evaluating a manuscript. "Catherine Mills tells me you studied at Columbia? With Professor Harrison?" "Yes. Do you know him?" "We've corresponded. He's adequate." From Ricci, this was apparently high praise. "Come. We have much to do and very little time." He led her through corridors and upstairs, past rooms full of researchers bent over documents, into a reading room that smelled like old paper and possibility. Ricci had already pulled several record groups based on the information Lena had sent ahead. Merchant Guild records from the 15th century, account books from the Medici Bank, tax records that listed Florentine families by neighborhood. "The Castellani name appears in fragments," Ricci said, spreading documents across the table with practiced care. "Always on the periphery, never central. This is common for merchant families of that period. Important enough to be documented, not important enough to merit extensive records. But there might be something. There is always something, if you know where to look." Ricci handed her a pair of white cotton gloves. "You have 1 week, yes? Then we must be systematic. Start with tax records to establish the family's economic status. Then cross-reference with guild records to understand their business connections. If we find evidence of Medici Bank transactions, we can request the Medici private papers from the special collection." For the next 8 hours, Lena barely looked up. She worked through documents in archaic Italian, her rusty paleography skills slowly sharpening as she deciphered 16th century handwriting. Ricci appeared periodically with new materials, offering terse comments and corrections that were somehow more helpful than entire lectures would have been. By 4 p.m., she had a timeline. The Castellani family had been cloth merchants in the 1480s, moderately successful, with workshops near the Mercato Vecchio. They appeared in tax records regularly, always paying on time, which suggested financial stability. By 1510, they'd expanded into wool trading and were wealthy enough to commission a small family chapel in Santa Maria Novella.
"This is good," Ricci said, reviewing her notes. "But not extraordinary. Many families had this trajectory. You need the connection to the Medici court specifically." "I know, I'm looking." "Look harder, you have 6 days."
Lena returned to the hotel after the archive closed at 6, her eyes burning and her back aching from hunching over documents all day. She stopped at the front desk to ask about getting into her room. She'd somehow locked herself out, and found Marco Castellani in the lobby, talking to the manager. "Miss Brooks." He smiled, genuine warmth in his expression. "How goes the research?" "Slowly, but I'm making progress."
"Excellent. Actually, I was hoping to run into you. My aunt has agreed to return to Florence this weekend. She's willing to meet you, just you, no Mr. Vale, for coffee on Monday morning." Lena's heart jumped. "That's wonderful, thank you." "Don't thank me yet. She's only agreed because I told her you were a serious scholar, not just one of Vale's business people. If she thinks you're there to manipulate her—" Marco shrugged. "Well, let's just say it won't go well. I'm not here to manipulate anyone." "I believe you. Make sure she believes it too." Marco checked his watch. "I have to run, but good luck. You'll need it." Lena trudged upstairs, her mind already racing ahead to Monday. 4 days to find something meaningful, then a meeting with a woman who held grudges and controlled the entire deal. No pressure at all.
She found Ethan in the hotel courtyard, sitting at a small table with his laptop, working in the fading light. He looked up as she approached. "You look terrible." "Thanks. I've been reading 16th century tax records for 8 hours. It's a great look." "Find anything?" Lena sat down, uninvited. The Castellanis were successful cloth merchants, wealthy but not extraordinary. I need to find their connection to the Medici court, which means going through thousands more documents looking for one specific reference that might not even exist. "So you're saying it's impossible?" "I'm saying it's hard. There's a difference." Lena rubbed her eyes. "Marco says Signora Castellani will meet me Monday. Just me. If I don't have something by then, this whole thing falls apart." Ethan closed his laptop. "Then you'd better find something." "Wow, motivational speech number 2. You're really bad at this." "I'm not trying to motivate you. I'm telling you the reality." But his voice wasn't harsh, just matter of fact. "You're good at this, Miss Brooks. Better than you think. Trust that." He stood and walked away, leaving Lena alone in the darkening courtyard with lemon trees and impossible deadlines, and the strange, unsettling feeling that maybe Ethan Vale saw something in her that she didn't quite see in herself yet. Lena found it on Friday afternoon, buried in a leather-bound ledger that smelled like dust and centuries and the particular mustiness of paper that had survived floods and wars and the simple passage of time. She'd been in the archive since it opened at 8 a.m., working through account books from the Medici Bank with the kind of methodical desperation that came from having 3 days left and nothing concrete to show for it. Dr. Ricci had brought her the ledger almost reluctantly, as if he didn't want to get her hopes up. "This is from 1492, he'd said, setting it on her table with careful hands. "The year Lorenzo de' Medici died. The bank records became somewhat chaotic after that. His sons were not the managers their father was. But there may be something." There was. On page 73, in handwriting so cramped Lena had to squint even with the magnifying glass, was a payment record. 50 florins paid to Antonio Castellani for services rendered to the Medici household. The notation was brief, almost dismissive, but it was there. And in the margin, in different ink that suggested it had been added later, were 2 words, "Commission completed." Lena's hands started shaking. She read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating from eye strain and too much coffee. Then she flagged Ricci, who was working at a desk across the reading room. "Look at this," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Antonio Castellani, 50 florins. What kind of services would warrant that amount?" Ricci bent over the ledger, his reading glasses slipping down his nose. He was quiet for a long moment, and Lena could see his mind working through the same calculation she'd already done. 50 florins in 1492 was significant money. Not a fortune, but not pocket change either. The kind of payment that suggested skilled work, important work.
A commission, Ricci murmured, tracing the margin note with one gloved finger.
For what? It doesn't say. But the amount suggests artistic or craft work, perhaps goldsmithing, or... He stopped, his eyes widening slightly. Wait here. He disappeared into the stacks, moving faster than Lena had seen him move all week. She sat frozen at the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. This could be nothing, a dead end, some random transaction that had no follow-up, no supporting evidence, nothing to build a story around. Or it could be everything. Ricci returned 20 minutes later with another volume, this one smaller and more fragile. The Medici private inventory from 1495. It lists artworks and valuables in the family's possession at Lorenzo il Magnifico's death and during the years immediately after. If Antonio Castellani created something for them, and if it was valuable enough, it might be listed here. They went through the inventory page by page, Ricci reading the Italian aloud while Lena cross-referenced with her notes. Paintings, sculptures, jewelry, manuscripts, furniture. The Medici had owned an obscene amount of beautiful things, and tracking one specific piece felt like looking for a particular grain of sand on a beach. Then Ricci stopped. Here, listen to this. He read slowly, translating as he went. One marriage chest, walnut inlay, with scenes of the Judgment of Paris, commissioned 1492 for the wedding of Maddalena de' Medici, created by Antonio Castellani of Florence, valued at 45 florins. Lena grabbed the book, almost forgetting to be gentle with it. There it was, in black ink on yellowing paper. Antonio Castellani had created a marriage chest, a cassone, the kind of ornate furniture piece that wealthy Florentine families commissioned for their daughters' weddings, and he'd created it for the Medici family themselves. Is this enough? Lena asked. Is this the connection? It's evidence, Ricci said carefully. Whether it's enough depends on what you need it to prove. He looked at her over his reading glasses. What are you really asking me, Miss Brooks? Lena sat back, pulling off her gloves. Her hands were still shaking. I need to prove that the Castellani family has historic significance, that they weren't just random merchants, but skilled craftsmen who are trusted by the most important family in Florence. I need to show that their legacy deserves to be preserved. Then yes, Ricci said. This is enough. A Cassoni commission from the Medici is not a small thing. It suggests Antonio Castellani was a master craftsman, possibly trained in one of the major workshops. It suggests the family had connections, reputation, skill. Whether the Cassone itself still exists, he shrugged. That we may never know. Many were destroyed or lost over the centuries, but the documentation exists. That is what matters. Lena wanted to cry or laugh or maybe both. Instead, she very carefully photographed the ledger page and the inventory entry with her phone, then made meticulous notes about the archival codes and page numbers. Evidence that could be verified. Evidence that was real. Dr. Ricci, she said when she'd finished, thank you for everything. Thank Catherine Mills, she's the one who called in the favor. But he was almost smiling. Come back when you have more time, Miss Brooks. There are other documents here you might find interesting. Letters, court records, things that speak to how these families actually lived rather than just what they owned. I'd like that. Lena left the archive at closing time, stepping out into Florence in the golden hour when the light turned everything warm and forgiving. She had the evidence. She had the proof. Monday morning, she'd meet Signora Castellani and show her that her family's pride was justified, that their legacy was documented and real and worth preserving. If the old woman didn't throw her out immediately, Lena walked back to the hotel with her phone in her hand, composing and deleting a dozen different text messages to Ethan. Finally, she settled on something simple. Found it. Antonio Castellani created a marriage chest for the Medici in 1492. Full documentation. Meeting Monday should work. His response came 2 minutes later. Good. Report to my room at 7. We'll prep. Not congratulations or well done, just an acknowledgement that she'd completed the task she'd been hired for. Lena shouldn't have been disappointed, but she was anyway. She shoved her phone in her pocket and tried to focus on the victory instead of the hollow feeling in her chest. When she got back to Hotel Castellani, Marco was in the lobby again, this time with an older woman who had steel gray hair and wore a silk scarf that probably cost more than Lena's entire wardrobe. They were speaking rapid Italian, something about staffing schedules, and didn't notice Lena until she was halfway to the stairs. "Miss Brooks," Marco called. "A moment, please." Lena turned. The older woman was studying her with sharp dark eyes that missed nothing. "This is Signora Castellani," Marco said, and Lena's stomach dropped because she wasn't ready. She hadn't prepared. She was wearing jeans with archive dust on them, and her hair was a disaster. The old woman's expression didn't change. "So you're the one who insulted my nephew's potential buyer on the internet?" There was no good answer to that. Lena went with honesty. "I insulted him to his face, actually. The internet just happened to be recording." Signora Castellani's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Marco tells me you've been researching my family." "Yes, Signora. At the Archivio di Stato, I found evidence that Antonio Castellani created a marriage chest for the Medici family in 1492. The documentation is verified." "A cassone." The old woman's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "For which Medici daughter?" "Maddalena de' Medici. The inventory lists it as walnut inlay with scenes of the Judgment of Paris." Clever choice. The Judgment of Paris, a story of beauty and choice and consequences. Signora Castellani's eyes were still sharp on Lena's face. "What else have you learned about my family?" Lena pulled out her phone, showing the carefully photographed documentation. "Your ancestors were cloth merchants originally, successful enough by the 1480s to expand into wool trading. They commissioned a family chapel in Santa Maria Novella around 1510, which suggests both wealth and social standing. Antonio Castellani appears to have been a master craftsman, possibly trained in one of the major Florentine workshops. The Medici Commission proves his work was valued at the highest levels of society. Morse. Signora Castellani took Lena's phone, studying the images with an expression that was impossible to read. When she handed it back, her voice was careful. "And what does Mr. Vale plan to do with this information?" "I don't know what Mr. Vale plans to do with it, but I thought you should know that your family's history is documented and significant, that the pride you feel in your legacy is justified by evidence, not just tradition." The old woman was quiet for a long moment. Marco looked between them, clearly nervous. Finally, Signora Castellani said, "Monday, 10 o'clock. We'll have coffee in the courtyard, you and I. Come prepared to tell me everything you found. And tell Mr. Vale—" She paused. "Tell him I'm still deciding whether he deserves what my family built." She walked away before Lena could respond, moving through the lobby with the kind of authority that came from owning a place for 40 years. Marco let out a breath. "That went well, I think." "Did it?" "She didn't tell you to leave. That's progress." Marco smiled. "She's tough, but she's fair. If you're honest with her on Monday, if you show her you actually care about the history and not just the business deal, she'll listen. And if I can't convince her, then we're all out of options." Marco's smile faded. "The banks won't wait much longer for us to recapitalize. If the sale doesn't happen, we'll lose the properties anyway, probably to some corporation that will gut them and turn them into generic tourist hotels. At least with Vale, we have a chance at preservation." Lena thought about that as she climbed the stairs to her room. The weight of it. Signora Castellani was holding on to her pride and her legacy, but if she held too tight, she'd lose both. And Lena was somehow caught in the middle, trying to help a billionaire buy something while simultaneously respecting the woman who didn't want to sell. She made it to her room, showered off the archive dust, and changed into something that didn't look like she'd been crawling through 16th century documents all day. At exactly 7 p.m., she knocked on Ethan's door. He answered immediately, dressed in slacks and a button-down with the sleeves rolled up. His room was bigger than Lena's, of course it was, with a sitting area where his laptop sat open on the coffee table surrounded by papers. "Come in. We need to go over your presentation for Monday." "I just ran into Signora Castellani in the lobby." Ethan's expression sharpened. "And she didn't throw me out, which Marco says is a good sign. But she's tough. She wanted to know what you plan to do with the information I found." What did you tell her? That I didn't know. Because I don't. Lena sat in one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. What are you going to do with it, Ethan? Really? Is this just leverage for the negotiation, or do you actually care about any of this? He was quiet for a moment, and Lena could see him weighing his response, calculating what to say versus what he actually thought. Finally, he sat across from her and said, both. It's leverage, yes, but I also think it matters. These hotels have survived 200 years because the families who owned them cared about more than profit. If I gut that to make a quick return, I destroy the thing that makes them valuable in the first place. That's very pragmatic. It's the truth. Ethan leaned forward. I'm not a romantic, Lena. I don't preserve things because they're beautiful or historic. I preserve them because destruction is waste, and waste is inefficient. But the end result is the same. The hotels stay intact, the history is respected, and everyone benefits. Lena studied his face, trying to see past the careful control to whatever was underneath. Do you ever do anything just because it's right? Not because it's efficient or profitable, but just because it matters? Why would those things be mutually exclusive? They're not. But you talk about everything like it's a business calculation, like there's no room for things that can't be quantified. Ethan's expression was unreadable. I have a 6-year-old daughter who lives with me every other week. When she's with me, I leave the office at 5. I don't take calls during dinner. I read her bedtime stories even when I have conference calls with Tokyo at midnight. None of that makes business sense, and all of it matters more than anything else I do. Lena hadn't expected that. The sudden glimpse of something personal, something that wasn't calculation or strategy. She didn't know what to say. The point is, Ethan continued, his voice back to its normal, controlled cadence, I know how to separate what matters from what's profitable. The hotels matter. Your research matters. Making sure Signora Castellani trusts us matters. So let's make sure Monday goes well. They spent the next 2 hours going over Lena's findings, with Ethan asking sharp questions and Lena refining her presentation until she could deliver it in her sleep. By 9 p.m., her eyes were crossing and Ethan finally called it. Get some rest. You need to be sharp on Monday. Lena stood, gathering her notes. At the door, she paused. The cassone Antonio Castellani made. The marriage chest for Maddalena de' Medici. I've been thinking about it. And? The Judgment of Paris is a story about choosing between 3 goddesses, each offering something different. Hera offered power, Athena offered wisdom, Aphrodite offered love. Paris chose love, and it started a war. Lena met Ethan's eyes. I keep wondering what Maddalena thought when she saw that scene on her marriage chest, whether she saw it as a warning or a promise. Does it matter? I don't know, maybe. Lena opened the door. Good night, Ethan. She was halfway down the hall when she realized she'd called him by his first name instead of Mr. Vale, and he hadn't corrected her. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation and nerves. Lena rehearsed her presentation to Jessica over video chat, who declared it perfect and also boring, and made her add more personal touches. She walked through Florence, trying to see it the way Antonio Castellani might have seen it 500 years ago. The same streets, the same river, the same light. She ate gelato and avoided thinking about Monday morning. On Sunday evening, David cornered her in the hotel restaurant. He was leaving for Rome the next day for meetings with another property, but wanted to make sure Lena understood the stakes. If this meeting goes badly, the whole deal collapses. Marco can't move forward without his aunt's blessing, and she won't bless anything if she thinks we're using her family history as a manipulation tactic. I'm not manipulating anyone. I know that. You know that. Make sure she knows that. David's expression was serious. Ethan's invested a lot in this acquisition. Time, money, reputation. If it falls apart because you can't convince one old woman that we're legitimate, it reflects badly on everyone. Thanks for the pep talk. Really inspiring. I'm not trying to inspire you. I'm making sure you understand the reality. David stood. Don't screw this up. He left, and Lena sat alone at the table, pushing pasta around her plate without eating. The pressure was getting to her. She could feel it building in her chest, making it hard to breathe. Everything depended on Monday. Everything. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Stop spiraling. You're ready. Lena stared at the message. She hadn't told him she was spiraling, hadn't talked to him since Friday night, but somehow he knew anyway. She typed back, How did you know I was spiraling? His response, because I spiral before important meetings too. The difference is I've learned to recognize it's usually my brain lying to me about how prepared I am. You're ready. Trust that. Lena read the message 3 times, something warm and unexpected settling in her chest. She saved it before she could think better of it, then went upstairs and forced herself to sleep. Monday morning arrived with cloudless skies and Lena's alarm going off at 7. She dressed carefully. One of the dresses Jessica had insisted on, professional but not stuffy, paired with the good shoes that hurt her feet but looked expensive. She reviewed her notes one final time, then walked downstairs at 9:45 with her heart in her throat. The courtyard was already set up. A small table under the lemon trees, 2 chairs, a coffee service that looked like it cost more than Lena's monthly rent back in New York. And sitting in one of the chairs, reading glasses perched on her nose and a leather-bound book open in her lap, was Signora Elena Castellani. She looked up as Lena approached. "You're early. Good. I hate people who are late." "So do I." Lena sat in the offered chair, trying to project confidence she didn't quite feel. "Thank you for meeting with me, Signora." "Don't thank me yet. I haven't decided if you're wasting my time." The old woman closed her book, Dante's Inferno, Lena noted with interest, and set it aside. "Marco tells me you found evidence of my family's connection to the Medici court. Show me." Lena pulled out her tablet where she'd organized all her findings into a clear presentation. She walked Signora Castellani through the tax records, the guild documentation, the evidence of wealth and social standing. Then she showed her the payment record from the Medici Bank and the inventory entry for the Casson. Antonio Castellani was a master craftsman, Lena said, keeping her voice steady and professional. The fact that the Medici family commissioned work from him proves his skill and reputation. Marriage chests were important pieces. They displayed a family's wealth and taste. The Medici wouldn't have hired just anyone. Signora Castellani studied the images on the tablet, her expression unreadable. "What happened to the Cassone?" "I don't know. Many were destroyed over the centuries or sold or simply lost to time. The inventory proves it existed, but tracking its current location would require more research." Lena paused. "If you wanted me to, I could try to find out. It might be in a museum somewhere or a private collection." "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm curious. Because history shouldn't be lost just because it's inconvenient to track down. Because—" Lena stopped herself. "Because I care about this. Not just as a job, but as something that matters." The old woman's dark eyes were sharp on Lena's face. "Mr. Vale is paying you to care. He's paying me to research and translate. The caring part is free." Signora Castellani set down the tablet. She poured coffee for both of them from the silver service, the movements precise and practiced. "Tell me about him. The truth, not the business pitch." Lena wrapped her hands around the delicate cup, grateful for something to hold. "He's brilliant and difficult and doesn't know how to talk to people like they're human. He works too hard, expects too much, and probably hasn't taken a real day off in years. But he's not lying about wanting to preserve the hotels. I think he actually means it, even if his reasons are more pragmatic than romantic." "And you? What do you want?" "Honestly, I want these hotels to survive. Whether that's under your family's ownership or Mr. Vale's or someone else's, I don't care. I just don't want to see them turned into something generic and soulless." Lena met the old woman's eyes. "Your family spent 200 years building something beautiful. That deserves to be protected." Signora Castellani was quiet for a long moment, sipping her coffee. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "My husband died 18 years ago. Heart attack, very sudden. He was the one who truly loved these hotels. He grew up in this building, knew every corner, every story. I ran them because he would have wanted me to, but they were always his dream more than mine. I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be. 18 years is long enough to stop expecting condolences." The old woman set down her cup. "Marco thinks we should sell. He's probably right. We don't have the capital to maintain the properties properly, and I'm too old to keep working like this. But selling feels like betrayal, like I'm giving away the last piece of my husband's legacy." Lena understood that, the weight of it. Legacy isn't just about ownership, it's about what survives. If Mr. Vale preserves the hotels, if he respects their history and maintains them properly, then your husband's legacy survives. Maybe that's worth more than keeping the family name on the deed.
You're very wise for someone so young. I'm not that young, and I'm not wise. I just know what it feels like to watch something you care about slip away. Lena thought about her own deferred dreams, her years of waitressing while telling herself she'd get to graduate school eventually. Sometimes letting go is the only way to preserve what matters. Signora Castellani studied her for another long moment. Then she reached across the table and took Lena's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong.
I'll meet with Mr. Vale. Tomorrow, here in the courtyard, 10 o'clock. You'll be present to translate and to make sure he doesn't say anything stupid. A small smile. And to remind me, if necessary, that letting go can be an act of preservation rather than surrender. Relief flooded through Lena so intensely she felt lightheaded. Thank you, Signora. I promise we'll... Don't promise anything. Just make sure he understands what he's buying. Not just property, but responsibility. If he agrees to that, we can discuss terms. The old woman stood, ending the meeting. Lena stood too, feeling like she'd just passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. Signora Castellani picked up her copy of Dante and paused. The Cassone you mentioned, the Judgment of Paris scene. Do you know why that story was popular for marriage chests? Not exactly. Because it reminded brides that choices have consequences. That beauty and love are powerful, but they can also be dangerous. Signora Castellani's smile was knowing. Something to remember, Miss Brooks. She walked away, leaving Lena alone in the courtyard with empty coffee cups and the sudden realization that the old woman had seen something Lena herself hadn't quite admitted yet. Lena pulled out her phone and texted Ethan. She agreed to meet. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., courtyard. Don't screw it up. His response was immediate. Good work. Dinner tonight to prepare? Lena hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Dinner felt personal, felt like more than business, felt like something she should probably say no to. She typed, "Where?" The restaurant was small and tucked away in a neighborhood Lena would never have found on her own. Ethan was already there when she arrived at 8, sitting at a corner table with a bottle of wine already open. "You look nervous," he said as she sat. "I'm fine." "You're terrible at lying." But he poured her a glass anyway. "Tell me about the meeting. Everything." Lena walked him through the conversation with Signora Castellani, leaving out only the final comment about the Judgment of Paris, because that felt too personal to share. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression focused and analytical. "She's testing me," he said when Lena finished, "making sure I understand this isn't just about money." "It's not just about money. I know that, but most people in my position wouldn't." Ethan leaned back. "She's smart. Probably smarter than half the business partners I've worked with. She ran these hotels for 40 years after her husband died. Smart doesn't begin to cover it." They ordered food and the conversation drifted away from business into something stranger. Ethan asking about Lena's research process, Lena asking about his daughter. He showed her a photo on his phone, a little girl with dark curls and his gray eyes, grinning at the camera with chocolate on her face. "Mia," he said, and there was something in his voice that Lena had never heard before, something unguarded. "She's with her mother this week. I call every night before bed, but it's not the same. You miss her. Always. Even when she's with me, even when she's driving me crazy by refusing to go to sleep or eat anything that isn't shaped like a dinosaur, I'm already missing her." Ethan put his phone away. "She's the only thing that makes sense, you know? Everything else is complicated and requires strategy and careful management. But with Mia, it's simple. I'm her dad. That's all she needs me to be." Lena felt something shift in her chest, seeing this version of Ethan that had nothing to do with business deals or efficiency. Just a father who missed his kid. "She's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her. She's the only reason I didn't completely lose myself after the divorce." Ethan's expression closed down slightly, the unguarded moment passing. "Claire, my ex-wife, she was right to leave. I was impossible to live with. Too focused on work, never home, always treating our marriage like another business deal to manage instead of an actual relationship. That sounds lonely." "It was. It is." He met Lena's eyes. "But I'm working on it. Being better, being present. Mia deserves that." The food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Lena kept stealing glances at Ethan, trying to reconcile this version,
tired and honest and almost vulnerable, with the controlled billionaire who'd hired her. Both were real, she realized. He was both people at once, and maybe that was the point. Nobody was just one thing. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said eventually.
You're going to anyway. Why did you really hire me? And don't say it's because I speak Italian and have the right degree. You could have found 100 consultants with better credentials. Ethan was quiet for a moment, turning his wine glass in slow circles. Because you weren't afraid of me. In Luminare, after you answered me in Italian, you looked me in the eye and didn't back down. Most people don't do that. They're either intimidated by the money or trying to get something from me. You were just honest, even when it cost you. It cost me my job. And I offered you a better one, so it worked out. But his smile was slight, almost self-deprecating. I hire people who tell me the truth, Lena. That's rare enough to be valuable. Lena absorbed that, the use of her first name, the admission that he valued honesty over credentials. What if the truth is something you don't want to hear? Then I especially need to hear it. Ethan's expression was serious. Promise me something. Tomorrow, when we meet with Signora Castellani. If I'm about to say something stupid or insensitive, you'll stop me. I don't always realize when I'm being an ass, like, I noticed. So you'll help? Yeah, I'll help. Lena raised her glass. To not screwing up tomorrow. To not screwing up tomorrow, Ethan echoed, and they drank to impossible promises and the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could actually pull this off. They walked back to the hotel through Florence at night, the streets quiet except for the occasional cluster of late diners and tourists taking photos. Ethan pointed out buildings, telling her stories about their history that he'd clearly researched. The Bargello, the Badia Fiorentina, the Palazzo, where Dante had supposedly first seen Beatrice. You've done your homework, Lena said.
I always do. That's how you avoid making expensive mistakes. But there was something almost shy in his voice. I wanted to understand the city before I tried to own part of it. Seemed like the least I could do. They reached the hotel too soon. Lena stopped in the lobby, suddenly not wanting the evening to end, even though she knew it should. Thank you for dinner.
Thank you for making tomorrow possible. Ethan's expression was difficult to read in the dim lighting. Get some sleep. We have a lot riding on the next few hours. He walked away before Lena could respond, leaving her standing in the empty lobby with warmth in her chest and the terrible, wonderful realization that somewhere between New York and Florence, between archive dust and late-night dinners, she'd started to care about Ethan Vale as more than just an employer, which was a problem because in 3 weeks she'd be back in New York and he'd still be here, and none of this would matter anymore. Lena went to her room and lay awake staring at the frescoed ceiling, thinking about marriage chests and the judgment of Paris and choices that had consequences. Signora Castellani had been trying to warn her about something, she thought, about choosing beauty or love, or whatever this feeling was over wisdom and safety. But maybe it was already too late for warnings. The meeting started badly. Ethan arrived in the courtyard at 9:55 wearing a suit that probably cost more than some people's cars, carrying a leather portfolio and the kind of controlled confidence that made him look like he was about to close a Fortune 500 merger rather than have coffee with a 78-year-old hotel owner. Lena, already seated at the table with Signora Castellani, felt her stomach drop. Mr. Vale, the old woman said in Italian, not standing. You're early. Another American habit I find tedious. Ethan's expression didn't flicker. He responded in the same language, his Italian smooth but slightly formal. Signora Castellani, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know your time is valuable. All time is valuable, Mr. Vale. The question is whether you'll waste mine. She gestured to the empty chair. Sit. We have much to discuss, and I have little patience for pleasantries. Lena watched Ethan sit, saw the slight tension in his shoulders that meant he was on edge, even if his face didn't show it. She'd seen that tension before, in their first meeting in his office, when he was calculating every word before he spoke it. Marco arrived with Vittoria, both looking nervous. They took seats at the edges of the conversation, witnesses more than participants. The hotel manager brought fresh coffee, then disappeared quickly. Signora Castellani poured for herself, ignoring everyone else. Miss Brooks tells me you want to preserve my family's hotels. Explain what that means in practice, not in marketing language. Ethan opened his portfolio, pulling out architectural drawings and financial projections. The properties need approximately $12 million in renovations and updates. Plumbing, electrical, structural repairs that have been deferred for years. My plan is to... I didn't ask about your plan. I asked what preservation means to you. The old woman's voice was sharp. Do you even know the history of these buildings? Or are they just assets on a spreadsheet? Lena saw Ethan's jaw tighten, saw him start to respond with something that would probably be logical and correct and completely wrong for this conversation. She cut in before he could speak. Signora, perhaps Mr. Vale could tell you about his research into Florence's architectural history? He spent considerable time understanding the context. It was a lifeline, and Ethan took it. He set aside the financial documents and started talking about the Renaissance building techniques used in the original construction, about the frescoes that needed expert restoration, about his meetings with preservation specialists in Rome who'd worked on similar historic properties. His voice lost some of its corporate polish, became more animated, more genuine. Signora Castellani listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes moving between Ethan and the portfolio and Lena. When Ethan finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You've done your homework, I'll grant you that. She sipped her coffee. But research and respect are not the same thing. You can study a thing without understanding why it matters. Then help me understand, Ethan said, and Lena heard something shift in his voice. Less control, more honesty. Tell me why these hotels matter to you beyond the financial investment, because I suspect that's what you really want to know, whether I can see past the numbers to the actual value. The old woman's expression softened slightly. My husband's grandfather opened the first Hotel Castellani in 1823. He was a minor merchant who'd saved for 15 years to buy the building. Everyone told him he was foolish, that Florence didn't need another hotel, that he'd lose everything. He did it anyway because he believed travelers deserved beauty, not just shelter. She paused, looking around the courtyard at the lemon trees and ancient stone. 5 generations of my husband's family ran these hotels before I took over. They survived wars, floods, economic crashes, fascism. They survived because every single owner believed the same thing, that beauty matters, that history matters, that the way you treat people matters more than how much money you make from them. I understand that, Ethan said. Do you? Because from where I sit, Mr. Vale, you're a man who makes money by acquiring things and making them profitable. That's not inherently wrong, but it's also not preservation. It's business. Lena watched Ethan absorb that, saw something flicker across his face that might have been frustration or might have been recognition. He was quiet for longer than she'd ever seen him be quiet in a negotiation. You're right, he said finally. I am a businessman. I do think about profit and efficiency and return on investment. But I'm also a father who reads his daughter stories about beautiful things that lasted, and I want her to grow up in a world where not everything is disposable. He leaned forward, his corporate polish completely gone now. These hotels will never be my most profitable acquisition. The renovation costs are too high, the restrictions on changes too limiting. If I wanted pure profit, I'd walk away and buy something easier. But Miss Brooks spent 2 weeks in archives finding proof that your family created beauty for the Medici, and it made me realize that's what I'm actually trying to buy. Not property. The right to be part of that legacy. To add another generation to the story instead of ending it. Signora Castellani's expression was unreadable. Pretty words. Honest words. Ethan's voice was steady. I can't promise I'll run these hotels the way your husband would have. I don't have his history or his connection to this city. But I can promise I'll try to honor what he built. And I can promise that if I fail, it won't be because I didn't care. The silence that followed felt enormous. Lena held her breath, watching the old woman's face for any sign of what she was thinking. Marco looked like he might be sick. Vittoria was taking notes, her expression carefully neutral. Finally, Signora Castellani spoke. There's a businessman in Rome who's also made an offer. Paolo Rinaldi. Perhaps you know him? Ethan's expression went very still. I know of him. He's offered $65 million, $5 million more than your offer, and he's Italian, which Marco tells me should matter to me. The old woman's eyes were sharp on Ethan's face. Give me one reason I should choose you instead. Lena's stomach dropped. This was news, bad news. She looked at Ethan, saw him processing the information with the same controlled calm he brought to everything. I can't, he said simply. If your priority is getting the highest price and keeping the hotels in Italian ownership, Rinaldi is the better choice. I won't pretend otherwise. Marco made a small noise of protest. Vittoria looked up from her notes, surprised. Even Signor Castellani seemed taken aback by the honesty. You're not going to fight for the deal? I'm going to tell you the truth and let you make an informed decision. Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact. Rinaldi has more money than I do and better political connections in Italy. If those are your priorities, work with him. But if you want someone who will actually preserve these properties instead of gutting them for short-term profit, you should know that Rinaldi's business model is buying historic hotels, doing minimal renovations, and flipping them within 5 years. You're making accusations without evidence. I'm stating facts based on his previous acquisitions. The Grand Hotel Milano, the Palazzo Veneto in Venice, the Excelsior in Rome, all purchased, minimally updated, and resold within 60 months. You can verify the timeline yourself. Ethan pulled out his phone, showing transaction records. He's not a preservationist, Signora. He's a flipper with better PR. Signora Castellani took the phone, studying the information. Her expression was impossible to read. When she handed it back, she said, Mr. Rinaldi told me you would try to discredit him with lies. Then call the current owners of those properties and ask them directly. I'll wait. The old woman's lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. You're either very confident or very stupid, Mr. Vale. I'm honest, which in business is often indistinguishable from stupidity. Ethan stood, surprising everyone. Thank you for your time, Signora. Whatever you decide, I hope the hotels end up with someone who deserves them. He was walking away. Actually walking away from a $60 million deal because he wouldn't compromise on the truth. Lena stared at him, then at Signora Castellani, then back at Ethan's retreating figure. Wait! The old woman's voice was quiet but commanding. Ethan stopped. Sit down, Mr. Vale. We're not finished. Ethan returned to his chair, his expression carefully neutral. Lena could see the tension in his shoulders, the control it was taking to appear calm. Signora Castellani poured more coffee, her movements deliberate. Paolo Rinaldi called me 3 days ago. He's offered to make me a permanent cultural advisor with full veto power over any changes to the properties, guaranteed salary, lifetime position, complete creative control. That's a generous offer, Ethan said. It's manipulation. He thinks an old woman's pride can be bought with a fancy title and the illusion of control. She looked at Ethan directly. What are you offering me, Mr. Vale? Besides honesty and good intentions? Ethan glanced at Lena, and she could see him thinking, calculating, trying to figure out the right answer. She gave him a slight nod, encouragement to trust his instincts. Nothing, he said finally. I'm not offering you a position or control or anything else that would make you responsible for my decisions. If I buy these hotels, they become my responsibility, my risk. You've carried that burden for 40 years. You shouldn't have to carry it anymore just to make me feel better about the acquisition. So I'm supposed to sell you my family's legacy and then walk away? Trust that you'll do right by it? Yes. Because the alternative is keeping control while letting me take the financial risk, which isn't fair to either of us. Ethan's voice was steady. I know that's a terrible sales pitch, but it's the truth. If you can't trust me to preserve these hotels without your oversight, then you shouldn't sell to me at all. The courtyard was silent, except for the fountain and the distant sounds of Florence waking up. Lena watched Signora Castellani's face, saw something shift in her expression. Not quite approval, but maybe respect. Miss Brooks, the old woman said without looking away from Ethan, you've spent time with Mr. Vale. You've seen how he works. Do you trust him? It was a trap. Lena knew it was a trap. If she said yes and Ethan failed, she'd be responsible. If she said no, the deal died here. The safe answer was to deflect, to say it wasn't her place to judge, to stay neutral. Instead, Lena chose honesty. I trust that he means what he says. I trust that he'll work harder than anyone else to get this right. I don't trust that he'll be perfect. Nobody is. But I trust that if he makes mistakes, he'll own them and try to fix them instead of making excuses. She met Signora Castellani's eyes. That's more than most people can say. The old woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to Marco. Call Rinaldi. Tell him we're declining his offer. Marco's eyes went wide. Zia, are you certain? I'm certain that I'm tired of being courted by men who think I'm too old and stupid to see through their nonsense. At least Mr. Vale has the decency to be honest about his limitations. She looked at Ethan. I'll accept your offer with 3 conditions. First, you will hire Miss Brooks as the permanent cultural guardian of all 3 properties. She will review all renovation plans, approve all design changes, and have final say on anything that affects the historic integrity of the buildings. Lena's brain stuttered to a halt. Wait, what? Second, Signor Castellani continued, ignoring Lena's shock. You will establish a scholarship fund in my husband's name for Italian students studying hospitality and historic preservation. 5 scholarships per year, full tuition, administered independently. Done, Ethan said immediately. Third, the hotels will remain the Hotel Castellani, Hotel Castellani Venezia, and Hotel Castellani Roma. No rebranding, no corporate naming rights, no additions to the name. If you can't agree to that, we have nothing further to discuss. I agree to all 3 conditions. Ethan's voice was steady, but Lena could see the relief in his eyes. Thank you, Signora. You won't regret this. I already regret it, but regret is familiar at my age. The old woman stood, ending the meeting. Vittoria will draw up the amended contracts. We'll close within 30 days. And Mr. Vale? If you break your word to me, I will haunt you. Italians are very good at holding grudges, even from beyond the grave. She walked away with Marco, leaving Ethan and Lena alone in the courtyard with Vittoria, who was already on her phone arranging the legal work. Lena turned to Ethan. Did she just hire me without asking if I wanted the job? Apparently. He was almost smiling. Do you want the job? I don't know. I wasn't planning to stay in Italy. I have a life in New York, student loans, an apartment. The position comes with housing in whichever property needs the most oversight at any given time, plus a salary commensurate with the responsibility. Catherine can work out the details. Ethan's expression was carefully neutral. But it's your choice. If you want to go back to New York after the 6 weeks, I'll respect that. Lena's mind was racing. Stay in Florence, or Venice, or Rome. Work with historic buildings and Renaissance art and actually use her degree for something that mattered. Give up the life she'd built in New York, the apartment she shared with Jessica, the familiar streets, and the dream of graduate school that she'd been chasing for 6 years. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. Ethan stood. I need to call David and Catherine with the update. We'll celebrate properly tonight. You, me, Marco, anyone else who wants to join. We just closed a $60 million deal. That deserves acknowledgement. He walked away, already on his phone, already moving to the next thing. Lena sat alone in the courtyard, her hands shaking slightly, trying to process everything that had just happened. They'd done it, against all odds, with a rival bidder offering more money and better credentials. They'd actually convinced Signora Castellani to sell. And somehow Lena had gone from temporary consultant to permanent employee in the space of a single conversation. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. How did it go? Lena stared at the message, then typed, We got the deal, and I might be moving to Italy permanently. Call you later. Jessica's response was immediate. What? But Lena couldn't deal with that conversation yet. She put her phone away and walked through the hotel, up the stairs to the 2nd floor, past the frescoed hallways to her small, perfect room. She needed to think. She needed to figure out what she actually wanted instead of just reacting to what other people offered her. The problem was, she had no idea what she wanted anymore. 3 hours later, Lena was still sitting on her bed, staring at her laptop screen without really seeing it, when someone knocked on her door. She opened it to find Marco holding a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression of pure relief. We're celebrating in the dining room. Everyone's there. Vittoria, the hotel staff, some of the longtime guests who've been watching this drama unfold. You have to come. I'm not really in a celebrating mood. Too bad. You helped save these hotels. The least you can do is drink champagne about it. Marco's smile was warm. Come on. My aunt specifically asked for you. Lena couldn't say no to that. She changed into something nicer than the jeans she'd been wearing and followed Marco downstairs to find the dining room transformed. Tables pushed together, candles lit, food appearing from the kitchen in waves. The staff had clearly been preparing for this, probably since the moment Signor Castellani had accepted Ethan's offer. Ethan was there, looking more relaxed than Lena had ever seen him, talking with Vittoria about contract timelines. Signora Castellani held court at the head of the table, accepting congratulations and well wishes with the grace of someone who'd spent her entire life being the center of attention. The hotel staff moved through the room with practiced efficiency, and Lena realized this was what the old woman had been trying to preserve. Not just buildings, but community. People who'd worked together for decades, who knew each other's families, who cared about more than just paychecks. There she is. Signora Castellani waved Lena over. The scholar who made this possible. Come, sit beside me. I want to talk to you about your new position. Lena sat, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I haven't actually accepted the position yet, Signora. Of course you have. You just haven't admitted it to yourself. The old woman's eyes were knowing. You love these buildings. I saw it in your face when you showed me the research, when you talked about Antonio Castellani and the Casone. You're not going to walk away from that. I might. I have a life in New York. You have an apartment and some furniture. That's not a life. That's logistics. Signora Castellani sipped her champagne. A life is work that matters. People who value you, the freedom to use your talents instead of wasting them carrying plates for people who don't see you. Lena felt something tight in her chest. You don't know anything about me. I know you answered Ethan Vale in Italian when you could have stayed silent. I know you spent 2 weeks in archives researching my family's history when you could have done something superficial and called it good enough. I know you told me the truth about Mr. Vale, even though lying might have been safer. The old woman's voice was gentle. I know you're afraid that if you choose this, if you choose something you actually want, it will be taken away. But fear is a terrible compass, child. Lena blinked hard against unexpected tears. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Then you'll learn and do better. That's how it works. Signora Castellani patted her hand. Now stop spiraling and eat something. The cook has been preparing this feast since dawn, and she'll be offended if you don't try everything. The evening blurred into food and champagne and conversations in rapid Italian and English. Everyone loose and happy now that the deal was done. Lena found herself talking with hotel staff who'd worked there for 30 years, who remembered Signora Castellani's husband, who had stories about famous guests and dramatic moments, and the time the Arno flooded and they'd saved the ground floor frescoes by forming a human chain. Ethan appeared at her elbow sometime around 9, slightly flushed from champagne and looking more human than she'd ever seen him. Dance with me, he said. There's no music. There's always music in Italy. You just have to listen. But he was smiling, actually smiling, and Lena realized he was a little drunk. Not sloppy, just loose enough that his control had slipped. Someone had turned on music, she realized, something old and Italian and romantic. Marco was dancing with one of the waitresses, and Vittoria was laughing at something the cook had said, and the whole room felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with business or contracts. One dance, Lena said. Ethan took her hand and pulled her into the small cleared space that had become a dance floor. He was a better dancer than she'd expected, leading with easy confidence. They moved in slow circles, and Lena was acutely aware of his hand on her waist, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. We wouldn't have this without you. You would have found another way. Maybe. But it wouldn't have been this. His expression was serious despite the champagne. Signora Castellani is right, you know. You should take the position. You're good at this. Better than good. Why do you care? In 3 weeks, I'll be done with my contract. You could hire someone else. I could, but I don't want someone else. Ethan's voice was low enough that only she could hear. I want you to stay, Lena. Not just because you're good at the job, but because working with you these past few weeks has been the best part of all of this. You make me better. Less of an ass, more honest, more willing to actually think about why I'm doing things instead of just doing them. Lena's breath caught. Ethan, I know it's complicated. I know I'm your employer, and this probably violates about 15 different professional boundaries. But I need you to know that if you stay, it's not just about the hotels. It's about... He stopped, searching for words. It's about the fact that you're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen past the money to whatever's underneath, and I don't want to lose that. The music swirled around them. Lena could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could see the hope and fear warring in Ethan's expression. This was the moment. The choice. She could say no, could go back to New York and her safe, familiar life, could avoid all the complications that came with staying, or she could choose beauty and consequence, like Paris choosing Aphrodite, knowing it would change everything. I'll stay, Lena heard herself say. But we're doing this right. Separate professional and personal, clear boundaries, no confusion about what's work and what's not. I'm not going to be the employee you're sleeping with. I wouldn't ask you to be. Ethan's relief was visible. We'll figure it out. Slowly, carefully, the right way. And if it doesn't work, then we'll deal with that too. Like adults who actually communicate instead of making assumptions. He pulled her slightly closer. Is this okay? It's okay. They danced until the song ended and another began, and Lena let herself feel the moment instead of analyzing it. Tomorrow she'd worry about logistics and contracts and what Jessica would say. Tomorrow she'd start figuring out what being the cultural guardian of 3 historic hotels actually meant. Tonight, she'd just dance with a man who saw her, who valued her, who'd walked away from a $60 million deal rather than compromise his honesty. The celebration went late, and by the time Lena made it back to her room, it was past midnight and she was exhausted in the best way. She fell asleep with moonlight streaming through her window and the distant sound of Florence at night, and for the first time in years she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She woke to her phone ringing at 6 a.m. Ethan's name on the screen. This better be important, she said, her voice rough with sleep. It is. Paolo Rinaldi is here in the lobby. He wants to speak with Signora Castellani about matching my offer and adding additional terms. We have a problem. Lena was awake immediately, her heart pounding. I'm coming down. She threw on clothes and ran down the stairs to find the lobby in chaos. Rinaldi was there, a man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit, flanked by 2 assistants. Marco was trying to block his path to the courtyard where Signora Castellani took her morning coffee. Ethan stood to the side, his expression controlled but his eyes dark with anger. Signora Castellani has made her decision, Marco was saying in Italian, his voice strained. There's nothing more to discuss. There's always more to discuss when someone makes a mistake. Rinaldi's voice was smooth, confident. I have new information about Mr. Vale's business practices that I believe the Signora would want to know before finalizing the sale. What information? Ethan's voice was cold. Ah, Mr. Vale, how convenient. Rinaldi turned, his smile not reaching his eyes. I was just telling young Marco here about your acquisition of the Hotel Prestige chain in 2019. You promised the sellers you'd maintain their legacy brand, then rebranded everything under Vale Luxury Hotels within 18 months. Classic bait and switch. Ethan's jaw was tight. That's not what happened, isn't it? I have the contracts right here. Rinaldi pulled out a folder, spreading documents on the front desk. Original terms promising brand preservation, followed by the rebranding announcement. It's all documented. Lena pushed forward, looking at the documents. They looked legitimate. Official contracts with Ethan's signature, press releases about the rebranding. Her stomach sank. Ethan, she kept her voice quiet. Is this real? It's real but incomplete. The original owners agreed to the rebrand after the first year because the Vale name had better market recognition. They were compensated and consulted on every decision. Rinaldi's leaving out half the story. Prove it, Rinaldi said smugly. Oh wait, you can't, because the owners signed NDAs as part of the settlement. They signed NDAs about the compensation terms, not about the working relationship. Ethan pulled out his phone. Give me 10 minutes and I'll have written statements from all 3 of them. This is ridiculous, Marco said. Signora Castellani has already made her decision. Mr. Rinaldi, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Not until I speak with her directly. Rinaldi started toward the courtyard again. She deserves to know who she's really dealing with. She knows exactly who she's dealing with. Signora Castellani's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. She stood in the courtyard doorway, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, her expression ice cold. And it's not you, Mr. Rinaldi. Signora, if you'll just give me 5 minutes to explain. I don't need 5 minutes. I don't need 5 seconds. The old woman walked forward, and everyone in the lobby took a step back out of pure instinct. You think I didn't investigate both of you? You think I'm some foolish old woman who makes decisions based on charm and promises? Rinaldi's confident expression faltered slightly. Of course not, Signora. I simply thought... You thought you could manipulate me with partial truths and carefully edited documents. You thought you could waltz in here at dawn, throw accusations around, and pressure me into changing my mind before I'd had my coffee. Signora Castellani's voice could have cut glass. What you clearly didn't think about is that I've been running businesses since before you were born, and I can spot a con artist at 50 paces. I'm not. Yes, you are. You're a man who buys beautiful things, squeezes every euro out of them, and sells them before anyone realizes they've been gutted. I spoke with the owners of the Grand Hotel Milano, Mr. Rinaldi. They told me what you did to their property, how you promised historic preservation and delivered corporate mediocrity. Rinaldi's face had gone pale. I don't know what they told you, but they told me the truth. Just like Mr. Vale told me the truth yesterday, even when it would have been easier to lie. Signora Castellani stepped closer to Rinaldi, and despite her age and his height advantage, she was clearly the one in control. I'm selling my family's hotels to Ethan Vale. The contracts will be signed within 30 days. And if you ever set foot in any of my properties again, I will have you removed by security and banned permanently. Do you understand? The lobby was silent. Even the morning staff had stopped their work to watch. Rinaldi looked at Signora Castellani, then at Ethan, then at the documents he'd brought as weapons. This is a mistake, he said finally. You'll regret this. Perhaps, but it will be my mistake to regret, not yours to profit from. The old woman's expression didn't change. Leave, now. Rinaldi left with as much dignity as he could manage, his assistant scrambling after him. The lobby doors closed behind them, and the silence that followed felt enormous. Then Signora Castellani turned to Ethan. Next time someone tries to sabotage one of your deals at 6 in the morning, have the courtesy to warn me before I've had my coffee. I didn't know he was coming, obviously, which is why you should have better security. But there was something almost fond in her voice. Come, we're having breakfast in the courtyard, all of us, and Mr. Vale can explain to me exactly what happened with that hotel chain rebrand, because I want to hear the full story. They followed her to the courtyard, where the morning sun was just starting to hit the lemon trees. Staff appeared with coffee and pastries and fresh fruit. Lena sat between Ethan and Marco, still trying to process what had just happened. Ethan explained the hotel prestige situation, providing details and context that Rinaldi's documents had deliberately omitted. The original owners had struggled with brand recognition, had requested the change themselves, had remained as consultants throughout the transition. The NDAs had protected their compensation package, not hidden any wrongdoing. Signora Castellani listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When Ethan finished, she was quiet for a moment. You should have led with that story yesterday, she said finally. It would have saved us all some drama this morning. I didn't think anyone would try to use it against me. Then you're more naive than I thought. There's always someone trying to use something against you. The old woman sipped her coffee. But the fact that you were prepared to defend yourself without resorting to lies is in your favor. Rinaldi would have invented a story and made it sound convincing. You simply told the truth and let it speak for itself. Marco cleared his throat. Zia, how did you know Rinaldi was lying? Because I called the Hotel Milano owners last week, after he first made his offer. They told me everything. How he'd promised preservation and delivered mediocrity, how they'd been powerless to stop him once the contracts were signed, how they regretted trusting him. Signora Castellani's smile was grim. I wasn't going to make the same mistake, which is why I chose Mr. Vale, despite his many flaws. Thank you for that ringing endorsement, Ethan said dryly. You're welcome. Now eat something. We have a long day ahead. They ate breakfast as Florence woke up around them, and Lena felt something settle in her chest. This was real. The deal was real. Rinaldi's attempt at sabotage had failed, and she was actually going to stay in Italy and help preserve these beautiful, complicated buildings. And maybe, possibly, see where things went with a man who made her crazy and made her laugh, and saw her as more than just the waitress who'd dropped a plate. It wouldn't be simple. It would probably be messy and complicated and nothing like the safe life she'd imagined for herself. But sitting in a Florentine courtyard with lemon trees and morning light and people who'd become more than colleagues, Lena thought that maybe complicated was exactly what she needed. The cassone that Antonio Castellani had made for Maddalena de' Medici had depicted the judgment of Paris, a choice between power, wisdom, and love. Paris had chosen love and started a war. Lena was choosing beauty and consequence, history and possibility, the terrifying freedom of building something new instead of hiding in something safe. And if that started a war with her own fears and doubts, well, she was learning that some wars were worth fighting. 6 months felt like both forever and no time at all. Lena stood in the courtyard of Hotel Castellani on a November evening, watching workers hang lights in the lemon trees for what Ethan kept calling the reopening celebration, and what everyone else recognized as his elaborate excuse to throw a party. The renovations had finished ahead of schedule, the frescoes restored to their original glory, the plumbing updated without sacrificing a single historic detail. The Venice and Rome properties were still in progress, but Florence was done, beautiful, perfect in its imperfect lived-in way. "You're doing that thing again," Jessica said from behind her. She'd flown in 2 days ago and had spent most of that time alternating between being amazed by Italy and giving Lena pointed looks about Ethan. "What thing?" "The thing where you stare into space and look terrified and happy at the same time. It's very dramatic, very Italian actually. You're assimilating." Lena turned to find her former roommate holding 2 glasses of wine, both probably from the hotel's newly restored cellar. "I'm not terrified. You're a terrible liar. You've always been a terrible liar." Jessica handed her a glass. "But you do look happy. Happier than I've ever seen you, actually." That was probably true. Lena had spent 6 months doing work that mattered, living in cities she'd only dreamed about, using her degree for something besides impressing people at parties she never attended. She'd found the cassone, eventually. Antonio Castellani's marriage chest was in a private collection in Milan, and the owner had agreed to loan it to the hotel for the reopening. It would sit in the lobby, a tangible piece of the history Lena had uncovered in dusty archives. She'd also spent 6 months navigating the complicated, messy, wonderful reality of being with Ethan Vale. They tried to keep it professional at first. Separate hotel rooms, carefully maintained boundaries, no public displays of affection that might make the staff uncomfortable. That had lasted about 3 weeks before Ethan had shown up at her door in Venice at midnight with takeout and an admission that he was terrible at pretending he didn't care about her. "I'm not good at this," he'd said, standing in the hallway with Thai food and an expression of frustrated honesty. "I'm not good at relationships or feelings or any of the things that normal people seem to manage easily, but I'm trying. And I need you to know that you're not just convenient or some attempt at redemption for being an ass in that restaurant. He'd stopped, searching for words. "You're the person I want to talk to when something good happens, when something bad happens, when nothing happens at all. And I don't know what to call that except important." Lena had let him in, obviously. They'd eaten pad thai on her tiny hotel balcony overlooking the Grand Canal and talked until 3 a.m. about everything and nothing, about his daughter Mia, who Lena had met the previous month, and who'd immediately interrogated her about whether she knew any princesses, about Lena's mother, who died believing her daughter would do something extraordinary, about the fear of failing at something that mattered more than anything either of them had attempted before. They still fought. Ethan was still difficult and demanding and sometimes forgot that other people weren't as comfortable working 16-hour days. Lena was still stubborn and occasionally too honest and had a tendency to take on more projects than any human could reasonably manage. But they were learning. How to communicate instead of assume. How to apologize instead of defend. How to build something together instead of just coexisting. "He's good for you," Jessica said now, pulling Lena back to the present. "I wasn't sure at first. The whole billionaire boss thing seemed like a recipe for disaster. But he looks at you like you're the only person in the room, even when the room is full of important people trying to get his attention. That's just focus. He's very focused. That's not focus, that's love. But sure, call it whatever makes you comfortable." Jessica clinked her glass against Lena's. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. You took a chance on something scary and it worked out. That's rare." Lena wanted to argue, to point out all the ways it could still fall apart, but movement across the courtyard caught her eye. Ethan had arrived with Catherine and a little girl in a blue dress, who was currently spinning in circles and laughing at the lights in the trees. Mia. 6 years old, fearless, with Ethan's gray eyes and his ex-wife's dark curls. She'd taken to Lena immediately, which Claire had admitted was unusual. Mia was cautious with new people, especially women who might be trying to replace her mother. But Lena had never tried to replace anyone. She'd just been herself, and somehow that had been enough. "Lena!" Mia spotted her and ran over, nearly tripping over her own feet. "Dad says the chest is here. The one from the Medi-something family. Can I see it?" "The Medici family. And yes, you can see it. It's in the lobby." Lena took Mia's hand. "Come on, I'll show you." They walked inside, Jessica trailing behind with an amused expression. The cassone sat on a custom-built platform in the center of the lobby, behind velvet ropes that made it clear this was for looking, not touching. It was smaller than Lena had imagined, maybe 4 feet long and 2 feet tall, but exquisitely detailed. The walnut inlay depicted the Judgment of Paris in stunning precision. 3 goddesses, 1 mortal man, a golden apple that had started a war. "It's pretty," Mia said, pressing her nose almost against the rope barrier. "Why are they all naked?" That's how artists painted people in the Renaissance. They thought the human body was beautiful. Lena crouched down to Mia's level. "See this scene? It's about making a choice. Paris had to pick which goddess was the most beautiful, and whichever one he chose would give him a gift. What did he pick? The goddess of love. She promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, but taking her started a war. Mia considered this seriously. That seems like a bad choice. A lot of people thought so, but maybe he thought love was worth fighting for. Lena glanced up to find Ethan watching them from the lobby entrance, his expression soft in a way she'd only started seeing in the past few months. "What do you think? Is love worth fighting for?" "I think fighting is dumb," Mia said with the certainty of someone who'd clearly thought about this. "You should just talk about your feelings instead. That's what my therapist says." Jessica made a noise that was definitely a laugh disguised as a cough. Lena bit back a smile. "Your therapist is very smart." "I know. She has an office with a sandbox." Mia turned back to the cassone. "Can I touch it?" "No, sweetheart. It's very old and fragile, so." "That's what Dad says about Signora Castellani, but she let me help her plant herbs yesterday." "That's different. Signora Castellani is tougher than this cassone." Lena stood as Ethan joined them, Catherine having disappeared toward the kitchen to check on catering. "Are you corrupting my daughter with Renaissance art history?" Ethan asked. "Someone has to educate her properly. She thought the Medici were a type of pasta." Lena was joking, but Mia had actually said that last week, and Ethan had found it so funny he'd nearly choked on his coffee. "Reasonable mistake. Italian words all sound like food." Ethan put a hand on Mia's shoulder. "Go find Catherine. She said something about gelato." Mia was gone before he finished the sentence, leaving Ethan and Lena alone in the lobby with the cassone and 200 years of history. "You're good with her," Ethan said quietly. "Better than I expected, honestly. Claire keeps asking me when you're coming to New York so she can meet you properly." "Your ex-wife wants to meet me?" "That's not terrifying at all. She wants to make sure I'm not dating someone terrible. Her words, not mine." Ethan moved closer, his hand finding Lena's. "I told her you're brilliant and stubborn and occasionally infuriating, and she said you sound perfect for me. High praise from someone who divorced you. She divorced me because I was a workaholic, who treated our marriage like a business merger. I'm trying not to make the same mistakes twice." His thumb traced circles on her wrist. "Which is why I need to talk to you about something." Lena's stomach tightened. In her experience, conversations that started with, "I need to talk to you about something," never ended well. "Okay. The Venice property will be finished in 3 months. Rome another 2 months after that. You'll need to split your time between all 3 cities, which means a lot of travel and not much stability." Ethan was choosing his words carefully, the way he did when something mattered. "I've been thinking about the logistics, and I have a proposal." "I'm listening. Move in with me." "Not here. I'm buying an apartment in Florence. Something that's ours instead of a hotel room. A place where Mia can visit, where you can actually have a home base instead of living out of a suitcase." He paused. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been together 6 months, and there are 1,000 reasons to wait. But I don't want to wait. I want to build something permanent with you." Lena's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. 6 months ago, she'd been a waitress with no prospects and a degree she thought was useless.
Now she was standing in a Renaissance hotel she'd helped restore with a man who wanted to build a life with her, and the weight of that choice felt enormous. What if it doesn't work? She asked. What if we move in together and realize we drive each other crazy? Then we'll figure it out, like adults who communicate instead of running away when things get hard. Ethan's expression was steady, certain in a way that made Lena want to believe him. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm still going to work too much and forget to eat dinner and probably make you want to throw things at me on a regular basis, but I'm also going to try, every day, to be better, to be present, to be someone worthy of the trust you're placing in me. That's a pretty speech. It's the truth. I'm done with pretty speeches that don't mean anything. He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. I love you, Lena. I'm in love with you. And I want to see where this goes when we stop treating it like something temporary. Lena closed her eyes, breathing him in. She'd never been good at trusting people, at believing they'd stay when things got difficult. Her mother had died. Her father had checked out emotionally years before that. Every relationship she'd attempted had ended with someone leaving or her leaving first to avoid being left. But Ethan had stayed. Through her doubts and her stubbornness and her tendency to overthink everything, he'd stayed. Had fought for them when she'd tried to pull away, had been patient when she needed space, had somehow managed to see past her defenses to the person underneath. Okay, she said. Ethan pulled back slightly. Okay, you'll think about it? Or okay, yes. Okay, yes. Let's get an apartment. Let's try the permanent thing. Let's... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Let's see what happens when I stop being so scared. He kissed her, gentle and sure, and Lena let herself fall into it, into the terrifying, wonderful possibility of choosing love over safety, of building something real instead of protecting herself from potential loss. They broke apart when someone cleared their throat loudly. Jessica, watching from the lobby entrance with a knowing smile. Sorry to interrupt, but Signor Castellani is looking for you. Something about the speech you're supposed to give tonight? Lena had forgotten about the speech. She'd been trying not to think about the speech, actually, because the idea of standing in front of 100 people and talking about historic preservation made her want to hide in the archives. I'll be right there. She turned back to Ethan. We'll talk more later? After the party? After the party, he agreed. When I can actually focus on something besides contracts and catering and making sure Marco doesn't drink too much and tell embarrassing stories about his aunt. Lena found Signora Castellani in what had been the old breakfast room and was now a small museum space dedicated to the hotel's history. Photographs lined the walls, the original building in 1823, guests from various decades, staff photos spanning generations. And in a place of honor, enlarged and framed, was the archival photograph of the 1492 ledger entry documenting Antonio Castellani's payment from the Medici Bank. There you are. The old woman was arranging flowers on a side table, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly how things should look. I wanted to review your speech before the guests arrive. I'm not sure I have a speech. More like some notes that might form coherent sentences if I'm lucky. Then we'll work on it. Sit. Signora Castellani pointed to a chair with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. What are you planning to say? Lena pulled out her phone, scrolling to the notes she'd been revising for days. I was going to talk about the research process, about finding the Casson documentation, about the importance of preserving history for future generations. She looked up. Is that too boring? It's safe, which is worse than boring. The old woman sat across from her, hands folded in her lap. Tell me why this actually matters to you. Not the academic reasons, the real ones. Lena was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for something she'd never quite articulated. When I was working at Luminaire, I used to look at the people eating there and wonder what their lives were like, whether they were happy, whether they'd worked for their wealth or inherited it, whether they even noticed the staff serving them. And I realized that most of them didn't see us at all. We were furniture, useful, occasionally pleasant, but not actually people who mattered. And then Ethan insulted you. And then Ethan insulted me in Italian because he assumed I was too stupid to understand. And I could have stayed quiet, could have cleaned up the plate, and apologized and kept my job. But I was so tired of being invisible. Lena felt the old anger and hurt rise up, familiar even after 6 months. So I answered him.
and it cost me everything I'd been working for. But it also gave me this. She gestured around the room at the photographs and history and beautiful space. This matters because it's about seeing people. Antonio Castellani was a craftsman who made something beautiful 500 years ago, and it would have been lost if someone hadn't documented it. Your husband's grandfather opened a hotel because he believed travelers deserved beauty. 5 generations of your family worked to preserve that belief. And now I get to help make sure it survives another generation.
Because you were seen, Signora Castellani said softly. Because someone finally looked at you and recognized your value.
Because Ethan took a chance on someone everyone else had written off. Because you trusted me to research your family's history. Because Marco believed I could help convince you to sell. Because all of you saw me as more than just the waitress who dropped a plate. Lena's voice wavered slightly. That's what preservation is really about, isn't it? Seeing value where others see nothing. Making sure the stories don't get lost just because no one thinks they're worth remembering. The old woman was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. That's your speech. Say exactly that. Not the academic version, the true version. People don't connect with research processes and archival documentation. They connect with honesty and emotion and the feeling that they're not alone in wanting things to matter. What if I cry? I might cry. Then you cry. Italians appreciate emotion. We're suspicious of people who are too controlled. A small smile. Though you should probably warn Ethan, he gets uncomfortable when people cry. He gets uncomfortable when people feel things in general. We're working on it. Good. He needs someone who'll push him to be more human. Signora Castellani stood, smoothing her dress. I'm glad you're staying, child. Not just for the hotels, though that matters too, but for yourself. You deserve a life that fits instead of one you've squeezed yourself into. She left before Lena could respond, and Lena sat alone in the small museum room with photographs of people long dead and the strange, overwhelming feeling that she'd somehow stumbled into exactly the life she was supposed to have. The party started at 7. The courtyard filled with guests, local dignitaries, hospitality industry people, journalists covering the renovation, hotel staff past and present. Lena recognized several archivists from her weeks of research, Dr. Ricci looking uncomfortable in a suit, but smiling when he saw the cassone in the lobby. Marco circulated with champagne and charm, playing the gracious host. Catherine managed logistics with her usual terrifying efficiency. And Ethan stood near the courtyard entrance greeting guests, Mia tucked against his side in her blue dress, both of them looking slightly overwhelmed by the crowd, but managing. Lena watched them from across the courtyard and felt her chest go tight with something she was finally ready to call love. Not the safe, careful version she'd tried to convince herself was enough. The real thing. Messy and complicated and terrifying and worth every risk. At 8 p.m., Marco called for attention and the courtyard went quiet. He gave a gracious speech about family and legacy and the bittersweetness of letting go. Vittoria spoke about the legal complexities and the importance of preservation contracts. Several staff members shared stories about working at the hotel over the decades, and there was laughter and a few tears and the feeling of community that came from shared history. Then it was Lena's turn. She stood in front of 100 people with her notes on her phone and her heart hammering and gave the speech Signora Castellani had told her to give. Not the academic version about research processes and archival documentation. The true version about being invisible and being seen, about dropping plates and finding purpose. About the strange journey from a Manhattan restaurant to a Florentine courtyard. I came to Italy thinking this was a temporary job, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. 6 weeks, good money, then back to my real life in New York. But I realized somewhere along the way that this is my real life. The work I'm doing here, the people I'm working with, the history I'm helping to preserve. This is what I was supposed to be doing all along. I just had to break a plate and insult a billionaire to figure it out. There was laughter at that, and Lena saw Ethan's slight smile, the warmth in his eyes. Antonio Castellani made a cassone for the Medici family in 1492. It depicted the judgment of Paris, which is a story about choosing between power, wisdom, and love. Paris chose love, and it started a war. And I keep thinking about that choice, about what it means to choose something because it matters instead of because it's safe. She looked at Signora Castellani, at Marco, at Ethan. These hotels matter. The history matters. The people who built them and maintained them and fought to preserve them matter, and I'm honored to be part of that story now. She sat down to applause, her hands shaking, and Jessica immediately handed her a glass of champagne. That was perfect. You didn't even cry. I almost did, multiple times. But you didn't. Growth. Jessica clinked her glass against Lena's. I'm going to miss having you in New York, but this suits you. The whole sophisticated European thing. Very impressive. I'm not sophisticated. I'm just employed in a place with better architecture. Same thing, basically. The party continued for hours. Lena circulated, accepting congratulations and answering questions about the research process, and trying not to get cornered by journalists who wanted quotes about Ethan Vale's business practices. She found herself talking to former staff members who remembered Signora Castellani's husband, who had stories about the hotel in the 60s and 70s, when Florence was full of artists and writers and young people looking for beauty. Around 11 p.m., she escaped to the small museum room, needing a break from the noise and the people. The cassone sat in its frame on the wall, Antonio Castellani's work preserved and visible after 500 years. The Judgment of Paris, frozen in walnut inlay, a choice made and consequences accepted. Hiding? Ethan's voice came from the doorway. Regrouping, there's a difference. Lena turned to find him loosening his tie, Mia presumably asleep somewhere with Catherine watching over her. Good party. Successful party. Not the same as good. He moved closer, studying the cassone. Do you ever wonder what happened to Maddalena, the Medici daughter who received this as a wedding gift? All the time. The records say she married a minor noble from Ferrara, had 4 children, died in 1520. But that's just facts. I don't know if she was happy, if she loved her husband, if she ever looked at this scene and thought about choices and consequences. Maybe she was happy. Maybe she chose beauty and love, and it worked out. Ethan's hand found hers. Not everything that starts with a difficult choice ends in war. Paris and Helen started a war. Paris and Helen also loved each other enough that he'd fight an entire civilization for her. That's not nothing. Ethan pulled Lena closer, his voice quiet. I'd fight for you, if it came to that, just so you know. You're very dramatic tonight. I'm very drunk tonight. Catherine keeps refilling my champagne when I'm not looking. But his eyes were clear, focused on her with an intensity that made Lena's breath catch. I meant what I said earlier, about moving in together, about building something permanent. I want that with you, not because it's efficient or strategic or good for business. Because you make me better. Because I'm happier when you're around. Because loving you is the first thing I've done in years that has nothing to do with work or obligation or trying to prove something to people who don't matter. Lena felt tears prick at her eyes, the emotion she'd held back during her speech finally breaking through. I love you too, even though you're impossible and demanding, and sometimes I want to throw heavy objects at your head. That's fair. I'd probably deserve it. Ethan wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. We're going to screw this up sometimes, both of us. We're going to fight and make mistakes and have moments where we wonder if this was a terrible idea. But I think we're also going to be okay. Better than okay. How do you know? Because we're both too stubborn to give up on something that matters. And this matters, Lena. You matter. She kissed him, there in the small museum room with history on the walls, and a cassone that had survived 500 years, and the feeling that maybe, possibly, they were building something that would last just as long. They broke apart when voices echoed from the lobby, the party winding down, guests starting to leave. Ethan sighed, his forehead resting against hers. I should go play host, make sure everyone leaves happy and we get good press coverage. Always working, he admitted. But after tonight, I'm taking 3 days off. No calls, no meetings, no business emergencies, just you and Mia if she wants to join. We'll go to the coast, find a small town nobody's heard of, eat too much seafood, and sleep late. That sounds perfect. Then it's a date. He kissed her once more, quick and sure, then headed back to the party. Lena stayed in the museum room a bit longer, looking at the photographs of people who'd built this place, who'd maintained it through wars and floods and the simple passage of time. She thought about her mother, who died believing her daughter would do something extraordinary. about all the years she'd spent waiting tables and telling herself that someday, eventually, she'd get to use her degree for something that mattered. Someday had arrived. Eventually was now. And it had started with a broken plate and an insult in Italian, and the choice to answer honestly instead of staying safe. 6 months later, Lena would stand in the same courtyard with Ethan and Mia and Signora Castellani, and Ethan would pull out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Simple gold with a small emerald, nothing ostentatious or flashy. He'd propose without getting down on one knee because Mia had already told him that was cheesy, and Lena would say yes because by then the choice wasn't even hard. It was just true. They'd get married in the small chapel at Santa Maria Novella, the same church where the Castellani family had commissioned their chapel in 1510. Signora Castellani would cry, which would make Marco cry, which would make half the guests cry. Mia would be the flower girl and take her duties so seriously that she'd correct the priest's pronunciation twice. Jessica would fly in from New York and tell everyone who'd listen about how she'd always known they'd end up together, which was revisionist history, but nobody would argue. The hotels would thrive. Venice and Rome would finish their renovations and reopen to acclaim and full bookings. Lena would find 3 more pieces of Antonio Castellani's work in various museums and private collections, and eventually convince them all to loan the pieces for a permanent exhibition in the Florence Hotel. She'd write a book about the Castellani family that would get decent reviews and sell moderately well and matter more to her than anything she'd accomplished before. Ethan would learn to take vacations, would get better at being present instead of always thinking 3 steps ahead, would occasionally still be impossible and demanding, but would also show up when it mattered and try harder than anyone Lena had ever known to be good at something he'd never been taught. They'd fight sometimes, about work-life balance and whose turn it was to pick up Mia from school, and whether they should expand into other European cities or focus on deepening what they'd already built. But they'd also learn to talk instead of assume, to apologize instead of defend, to choose each other even when it wasn't easy. Mia would grow up spending summers in Florence and school, years in New York with her mother, fluent in Italian and English and completely comfortable moving between worlds. She'd ask questions about art and history and why people made the choices they made, and Lena would tell her about the judgment of Paris, about choosing love over power or wisdom, about how sometimes the right choice looked like the dangerous one, but was actually the only one that mattered. But that was all still to come. Tonight, Lena just stood in a museum room in a Renaissance hotel with her phone still showing her speech notes and tears drying on her face and the overwhelming feeling that her life had finally, imperfectly, beautifully, become something worth fighting for. She walked back to the party, to Ethan and Jessica and all the people who'd helped her build this impossible thing. The courtyard was still full of light and laughter, the lemon trees strung with tiny bulbs that made everything look magical. Somewhere a musician had started playing, and couples were dancing in the space between tables. Ethan saw her and held out his hand, an invitation. Lena took it, letting him pull her into the dance even though the music was too fast, and they were both terrible dancers and nothing about this was smooth or perfect. But it was real. It was hers. And after years of being invisible, of carrying plates for people who didn't see her, of convincing herself that safe was the same as happy, Lena Brooks had finally chosen beauty and consequence and the terrifying freedom of being seen. The cassone that Antonio Castellani had made for Maddalena de' Medici sat in the lobby, 500 years old and still beautiful, proof that some things lasted, not because they were protected from the world, but because someone had cared enough to preserve them. Lena understood that now. Preservation wasn't about keeping things frozen and untouchable. It was about seeing their value, honoring their history, and giving them space to be part of something new. She'd been preserved by people who'd seen her value when she couldn't see it herself. Now she got to do the same for buildings and history, and maybe, someday, for other people who'd been told their dreams were impractical, or their degrees were useless, or their worth could be measured in how well they carried plates. The music swirled around them. Ethan stepped on her foot and apologized with a wince. Mia appeared from wherever Catherine had stashed her, demanding a turn dancing with her dad. Jessica captured it all on her phone, probably already planning the Instagram post she'd write about her best friend's ridiculous fairy tale life. And Lena laughed, actually laughed, with the kind of joy that came from being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do, with exactly the people who mattered most.
One broken plate. One insult in Italian. One choice to be honest instead of safe. That's all it had taken to change everything.
The lights in the lemon trees glowed against the November darkness, and Lena Brooks, former waitress, current historian, future wife, permanent guardian of things worth preserving, danced in a Florentine courtyard and thought that maybe Paris had been right all along. Love was worth fighting for. Beauty was worth preserving. And some choices, no matter how difficult or dangerous they seemed, were actually just the truth waiting to be acknowledged. She'd chosen her truth. Now she got to live it. And that was worth every broken plate, every moment of fear, every risk she'd taken to get here. The party went on into the night, and Lena stayed in the center of it all, finally, completely, impossibly seen.